Today is Thursday, September 28th, 2023 at 6:00 p.m. I will call this meeting of the SAU 39 Board to order. I'm Shannon Gascoigne, Vice Chair. I will be presiding over the meeting this evening as our chair. Ms. Christy Peters is traveling and unavailable. Ms. Peters and I did work closely together on the agenda, and she looks forward to presiding over our next meeting. And I look forward to having her here presiding over our next meeting. We do have one member attending virtually. Mr. Eckhoff, are you there with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Great. And do circumstances prevent you from attending in person?
That is correct. I can't be there live in person tonight. My apologies.
And thank you for joining us online, Mr. Eckhoff. We appreciate it. Are you alone?
Except for two loud barking dogs, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So to those of you attending in person, welcome. Thank you for being here. There are a couple of hard copies of the agenda floating around the room for your convenience if you are attending virtually. Thank you for your engagement. You may follow along online. Our agenda is listed at SAU 39. If you click on boards and then SAU 39 boards and agenda, you can find it there. We will do our best to run as close to time on the agenda as possible. So we'll begin this evening with the first public comment 1 and 2. If you're present in the room and would like to address the board, please move to the table in the center of the room, turn on the mic, state your name and town of residence, and you'll have 3 minutes. Okay, great. Hi, Anna. Thank you for joining us. We have another board member joining us virtually, Miss Anna Zimmerman-Goulet. Anna, are you there?
I am here. Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you. And circumstances prevent you from being here with us in person this evening?
I am. I'm in my car in Western Massachusetts.
Oh boy. Okay. Well, thank you for joining us. And so you are alone in your car. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. All right. So do we have any public comment from folks in the room? All right. Seeing none, we also will be accepting public comment from our attendees on Zoom. If you would like to participate in public comment on Zoom, please raise your virtual hand and we will move you to a panelist. We would ask that you place your name in on the screen with your town of residence and turn on your camera.
No hands up.
All right, we'll give it a beat. All right. If you see none at this time, we will close the first public comment. There will be another opportunity for the public to address the board later in the evening. So welcome, SAU 39 board. For those watching or attending for the first time, the officials around this table this evening represent the combined school boards of the 3 districts, Amherst, Mount Vernon, and Sauhegan Cooperative. I hope that everyone had a great summer. I know that each of our respective boards and subcommittees have been incredibly busy and meeting all throughout the summer, but we haven't been together since last May, so it's good to see you all and welcome back to the table together. As stated on our agenda, we're going to begin this evening with a very special retirement acknowledgement. So we just want to take a moment to publicly recognize the service and contributions of a long-time SAU business office employee who has recently retired, Ms. Bonnie Hillsgrove. Ms. Hillsgrove served our district for 42 years prior to her recent retirement. And that certainly deserves a moment of public recognition. So we would like to take this time to just publicly thank her for her dedication and faithful service. And I would like to turn the floor over to Business Administrator Gracie to share a few words on behalf of the SAU Business Office. Ms. Gracie.
Thank you, Shannon. As you noted, Bonnie has worked in the SAU for a very long time, 42 years, 10 years in the Amherst Middle School in the office, and 32 years at the SAU. Bonnie is the person who pays all bills, or who paid all bills for the 4 districts in SAU 39, which is not an easy task. Just to give you an idea on the volume that Bonnie managed, on average, the SAU issued approximately 3,000 POs, paid close to 9,000 invoices, and cuts close to 5,000 checks in one fiscal year. We put together over 100 accounts payable manifest packets consisting of over 4,000 files. and Bonnie was a major player in all of that work. I have only worked with Bonnie in the SAU office for a few years, but met her many years ago as a newly minted board member assigned to review the manifest. This was back in the dark ages when the manifest was not digitized and passed from board member to board member in plastic bins. I was always impressed with Bonnie's organization and how helpful she was answering my many questions. When I started working at the SAU, I appreciated Bonnie's unflappable nature and exceptional work ethic. She was a team player and a pleasure to work with. The staff at the Brick School will truly miss her. And I gathered some thoughts from some of the staff that I wanted to share with you. When I think of Bonnie, I remember back to the days when she worked at AMS and handled all the substitutes for the entire district. Everyone called the subline and left a message that Bonnie would retrieve in the wee hours of the morning. She would then begin manually calling people on the sublist and fill positions. Seems like the most mundane and frustrating job in the world, but she loved it. She was always so sweet on the phone. Someone else's comment. I always enjoyed Bonnie's quick wit, welcoming laugh, welcoming smile in her laugh. She was truly part of the team and very much missed. Someone else. It was so nice working with Bonnie over the years. I enjoyed her stories, laughter, and of course, her farm fresh eggs. It has been an adjustment not seeing her every morning. She worked so hard and earned her retirement. Wishing her all the best. We'll be living soon. One of my accountant type folks. She's reliable, always the first one in the office in the morning. She's organized and neat. She has tiny, perfect handwriting. She kept all the office plants alive. She deeply loves all her pet animals, dogs, cats, chickens, and goats. She named my cat Moose. And every November for years and years, she was up all night roasting turkeys for her daughter Jane's classroom for the AMS Turkey Day that coincided with Parent Teacher Month. While Bonnie is now able to relax and enjoy retirement, her family will continue to serve our schools in SAU 39 through her daughter Dana Robinson, a veteran sixth grade teacher at AMS, and her granddaughter Mackenzie Robinson, a second-year kindergarten teacher at Clark. We are all grateful for the 3 generations of Bonnie's family dedicated to SAU 39. And our celebration with Bonnie will continue with the luncheon hosted in her honor at the Brick School later this fall. Thank you.
Well, again, thank you, Bonnie, and to your whole family. And thank you, Amy, for sharing those anecdotes with us. Next, we're going to take a brief moment to just make 2 acknowledgements. First, Assistant Superintendent Chamberlain, we would like to thank you for your service to SAU 39 as acting interim superintendent during FY23. Not only did you hold the 3 districts together during a tumultuous time of transition, you worked tirelessly to engage, challenge, and support to strengthen our schools. We are grateful to you for your leadership, your experience, and your passion for education. At this time, I'd like to recognize Ms. Brunt, who has a token of thanks and to present on behalf of the SAU 39 board.
So, we just want to say thank you so very much for stepping in unexpectedly. But I think we're all very grateful that you were part of our district, being able to step in with the experience you have and give us the leadership, the inspiration, the constant reminder of care. And just honestly, your leadership was greatly appreciated. So thank you so much. And enjoy some of that on your way home.
My wife will enjoy the flowers. She really has to be the one that put up with this.
Yes, and a special thank you to your wife. So how about a round of applause for Pete White? Right, and so next, I just would like to take a moment to formally welcome as a full SAU board, Superintendent Mike Berry to the table in his new role. Superintendent Berry, you officially took office on July 1st, and as is required in SAU 39, you hit the ground running. It's a special place here in 39 with many moving parts. We have so many opportunities ahead in each of our districts to fully deliver on the promise of public education. And we're happy to have you here to partner with us and lead our SAU as we strive to deliver the experience our students deserve and our community expects. And we look forward to hearing more about your plans for the SAU later in the meeting. So just welcome all of us. A round of applause. All right, so now on to business, and thank you all for your service. Our next order of business on the agenda is to elect a new secretary to the SAU 39 board. This replaces Victoria Parisi, who resigned her position from the Amherst School Board earlier in the summer. So nominations are now in order for the office of secretary. Are there any nominations? Or volunteers? Would anyone like to be a secretary? Okay, Stephanie, great for a volunteer. I appreciate that, Ms. Front. So we do have the volunteer. Are there any further volunteers or nominees? All right, hearing no others, I will accept a motion to elect Ms. Front as secretary of the SAU 39 board. Thank you, Dan. May I have a second? Oh, I see the second for Sunny Daniels. Thank you. Thank you. So if the motion passes, you will accept the roll next, correct? Yes, great. Thank you. Any further discussion? All right, since we have two board members on Zoom, we will do a roll call vote, starting with Mr. Torres.
Torres, yes. Torres, yes.
Yes.
Daniels, yes.
Stover, yes. Yes.
Right, yes. Lauren, yes. Hinkley, yes.
Gascoigne, yes.
Yes. Out there, yes. Burns, yes. Glover, yes. White, yes.
Peter and Peter.
Eckhoff, yes.
And,
Goulet Zimmerman, yes.
great. Thank you.
Yep,
motion-
Goulet Zimmerman, yes.
Thank you. All right, so the motion carries unanimously. Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Unn, for volunteering to do that. Next, we'll move on in our agenda to the consent agenda. Before we move through the list, I'd like to pull items 1 through 5 that are currently listed under reports in your agenda. Those are the treasurer's reports. So if you're looking at the agenda, you have the 3 items in the treasurer's reports and then below that. And I'd like to move those up to the consent agenda. Would anyone like to make that motion? Okay, thank you, Mr. Rayo, and a second from Ms. Friend. Do we have any discussion on that? Okay, great, and we have to do it. All right. Okay, so we'll start again with Mr. Torres.
Torres, yes.
Yes.
Daniels, yes.
Stover, yes. Yes.
Run, yes. Lauren, yes. Hinkley, yes.
Gascoigne, yes.
Yes. Out there, yes. Burns, yes. Glover, yes. White, yes.
Eckhoff, yes.
And,
Goulet Zimmerman, yes.
I think that's a yes. Thank you, Mr. Lee Zimmerman. Okay, so we got 8 items in the consent agenda. I'll read through the list, and if anyone would like anything pulled for further discussion, just raise your hand. Item 1, budget transfers to 2024. Okay. Number 2, the May 15th, 2023 draft minutes. The May 25th, 2023 draft minutes. The May 23 treasurer's report. June 23 treasurer's report. The July 23 treasurer's report. The August 23 treasurer's report. Okay, and then item 8 is the 2022-2023 annual recap of the treasurer's report. Okay, great. At this time, I will accept a motion to accept the consent agenda as amended and presented. Can I get a motion? Mr. Bayou, thank you for the motion. Can I get a second? Thank you. Any discussion? Okay. Great. We'll start with the roll call vote with Mr. Torres again.
Torres, yes.
Yes.
Daniels, yes.
Stover, yes. Yes.
Run, yes. Lauren, yes. Hinkley, yes.
Gascoigne, yes.
Yes. Scott there, yes. Laverne, yes.
Glover, yes.
White, yes.
Eckhoff, yes.
Okay, and we have lost Ms. Boulay Zimmerman. She is traveling and we thought that could happen. So, with that, the motion carries. Right, so moving on in our agenda, the next section is reports and memos. The facilities updates and enrollments reports you all have seen and had an opportunity to discuss at your individual board meetings. Does anyone have any questions on the items listed there? Wait. Yes, Mr. Glover.
On number 8, this is enrollment, and it also includes the projections. That's it's nice to see that here. I wanted to follow up on a discussion before about looking at past projections and comparing them to actual enrollments to gauge the accuracy and precision of our projections. Has there been any work done since then on that, or is it still on the to-do list?
We did the latest are there. We can go back, NASDAQ we've done just for 2 years. And before that, it was a little bit more implementation. We can certainly add a year before NASDAQ.
Yeah, I would appreciate that. It'd be good to know how close we are.
So to work through that vendor, yeah, we'll just go through all the ones that we have for NASDAQ. Right, yeah, we'll just go back,
Yeah.
go back to NASDAQ.
Seems reasonable.
You got it.
Great. Any other questions on items 6 through 8? Okay.
I have another one on 9.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so we're moving there. Yeah, so 6 through 8. So yeah, so item 9 is the Student Services Director Search Memo. So you will note that we will be seeking one board member to serve on the interview committee. But that appointment will be made at our October meeting. So please consider this is a place where you may be interested in serving and have bandwidth. So yeah, you have a question then, Mr. Glover, on item 9, or did I?
No, I still have a question.
Awesome.
The last part, site visit reference checks is the only piece of the process where the school board member would participate. And that has the parenthetical if necessary. So is that two questions? One is that a step that may not be necessary because of the if necessary?
Yeah, that's if necessary, depending on the candidates, when we get there, we do anticipate potential internal candidates, so it's like the internal candidates are not necessary. But, we do have, candidates that are outside the district, we choose to go see them, at site visits, then would be necessary.
Okay, and then I guess, if that was not necessary, then there would be no role for the school board member. So if the request or the discussion for us is to decide whether there should be school board member participation earlier in the process.
I know where you stand on this, for years of bringing different hiring processes with it, and, the process then, as I presented here today, was the exact process that we presented for the last administrative position that we brought forward in spring. And so, what I can certainly do is look at this and see where we might include the board in an appropriate manner earlier in the process. But that's kind of where we were, the exact process in the previous position.
I think, yeah, John, also don't the SAU 39 committee is school board, so we would be involved in the second round of interviews. That would be SAU 39. So it's not like the school board we want out. We'd be involved in that second round.
I guess I didn't understand the difference between SAU 39 committee. I don't really know what that is, the SAU 39 committee versus SAU.
It'd be a combination of people, like the SAU, like the level, the brick building.
And board. Is that committee, is that a sitting committee?
No, it's a hiring committee. All these committees need to be put together during the hiring process.
Oh, okay.
Any further questions? Does that clarify things for you,
I mean,
Mr. Glover?
Yeah, I stand on this issue so that that you can have the benefit of our feedback during your process. So it's, I get the sense that maybe the way I say this or been seeking this in an adversarial, but it's not coming from a place of conflict. It's coming from a place of cooperation and collaboration. Just want to make that very clear, and especially for, it's not for every employees, for, you know, high level administrators, you know, real leaders in throughout our whole system. And, you know, we are with you on that, and we get to yield a better process overall. So that's why I keep bringing this up, and these high level hires come across our table.
No, I think it's a good question to clarify, and it sounds like there's opportunity on the SAU 39 committee for certification in addition to the appointment that will be made next month as well. Is that a good summary of the discussion? Okay, great, thank you. All right, anything else on item 9? Okay, so moving right along, item 10. I'm gonna ask that we hold any questions around that one. That's Superintendent Barry's entry plan. I would like to ask that we hold any questions around that to the superintendent's report on the agenda. Because I believe Mr. Barry plans to, Superintendent Barry plans to cover some of his entry plan during his superintendent. Correct? Okay, great. All right, so moving right along, next on our agenda, as members of the New Hampshire School Board Association, we can avail ourselves to a number of workshops and webinars covering a variety of topics, ranging from effective board communication, right to know laws, policy, legislative updates, and much more. But as we all have very busy schedules and serve in multiple places, we have invited Mr. Will Phillips from the New Hampshire School Board Association to join us during this regularly scheduled meeting to bring a session directly to this board, highlighting some of the recommendations of the New Hampshire School Board Association specific to the roles and responsibilities of effective school board members, with an emphasis on communication, right to know, both internally as a board and externally with the public. I hope that this presentation may serve as a helpful refresher for some of you who are much more seasoned than newer board members like myself. Mr. Phillips, while you're getting set up there, welcome to SAU 39. We're happy to have you here tonight. And whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
You're doing good right now. You're doing good right now.
So, take your time to go and get set up, and Shannon, thank you for the introduction, and as kind of mentioned in previous meetings with the board chairs, the purpose of this presentation this night is for us to come together as I enter this role as a new superintendent, to get a refresher on some roles and responsibilities, common language, setting us up to work efficiently in a professional manner, consistent from this board to MV to ASD to Souhegan. That was really what we were trying to do here, and we had this scheduled for August, and we had a little more of a lengthier presentation, but with giving it September and things that we need to do, we were very fortunate that Will was able to join us tonight in place of Barry Christina, the executive director, to kind of work with us as we organize ourselves for a productive year, so we can be as successful and as efficient as possible to tackle some of the dilemmas and the issues that we have. And I appreciate Will and the association for coming here and work, and I appreciate everyone participating in this. So thank you very much.
Well, good evening, everybody. As mentioned, my name is Will Phillips. I'm the staff attorney and the policy services director at NHSBA. What I've got for you tonight is bits and pieces of 4 of our core trainings. When I had a conversation with the superintendent, probably just Monday or last Friday or so, he identified some places where he thought that I could be the most help in the least amount of time. And so I've taken about 6 hours of various trainings and boiled them down, and hopefully I can get through some of this stuff in 45 minutes. I'm not famous for getting through every slide, but I'll try to do my best. But that said, a lot of times when we do these trainings, what is of interest to you is probably more important than my just shoveling information off. And so if you have questions about some of the materials that I'm covering, feel free to ask away. If your question is not related to the material I happen to be talking about, either wait, maybe I'll get to it. And if I don't, then my contact information is on the final sheet of the PDF here. And I'm happy to take calls to, answer questions that don't involve fights among board members. So, and we don't act as legal counsel to any of the boards. So, sometimes when I get asked questions, I have to defer and say, I can give you sort of here's what the statute says, and here's the objective answer, but what you're asking for is something that you need to get specific legal advice for. So with that in mind, we'll move along. As Mike suggested, we're going to talk a little bit about roles and responsibilities. We'll talk a bit about communications, and then a little bit about organization or effective meetings. Along, you should have received digitally anyway two extra documents that I'm not going to deal with specifically during this presentation, but they could be helpful to you. Well, one is definitely helpful, and that is the right to know law resources. The right to know law gets amended every single year, and we have a packet of materials that there's four separate documents in there. I updated them yesterday to reflect the legislative changes from this past session. There weren't too many, so it's kind of easy to get it done, which is good because I had another training yesterday and I used it for that. So moving along, we'll start off with some core principles that deal with board service. And some of them are just tradition, and you can find these same principles throughout the country. And then many of them are based specifically on New Hampshire statutes or regulations. Sometimes for the most part, they'll follow those traditions and frameworks that are used throughout the country. So the first two principles, or the core principles: collective authority, not individual, and governance, not management. So first, we'll start off with collective authority of the school board. Sometimes school board members, new school board members, and sometimes actually experienced school board members are surprised to find that when they're elected, they're only elected to do one real thing, and that is sit at the board table at a duly called meeting. You get to deliberate and discuss with the rest of the board members, and then you get to vote on things. That's all the authority you have. You don't have the authority to solve employee problems or interject yourself into student matters. None of that comes with being an individual school board member. The school board acts as a governing body at the will of the majority of the body. And that will is expressed by votes at duly called meetings. There are certain times when the board, a majority of the board, will delegate responsibilities to one or more members, maybe a committee. The most common example would be your chairperson. So your chairperson is given some authority, some tasks that the other members don't have. Those typically they're pretty common sense. One is you have somebody preside over your meetings, because meetings would be rather chaotic and very inefficient if everybody could just, talk when they wanted to talk and yell louder than the other person just to make their point clear and so forth. And then they sign documents on behalf of the board if the board has authorized the signing in some way or another. They act as sort of the liaison between the administration and the school board in between meetings, largely with the idea that your agenda setting. So if for instance, a superintendent has a question about something going on in the school, they contact the chair, and the chair might say, I think you need to call a special board meeting so that we can give you the clear authority to do that. Or, no, you don't really need a special board meeting, just make sure you report it at the next meeting. And that's why you get superintendent reports in part, but But there are these communications that happen between between meetings that are really part of agenda setting process. Do you need to put it on an agenda for an upcoming meeting? Do you need a special meeting? And so forth. Oftentimes the chair is the sort of designated spokesperson for the board. Doesn't give the board chair the ability to take positions on behalf of the board that the board hasn't taken before, but is generally considered to be the spokesperson. There are times when boards might designate somebody else as a spokesperson, especially if you've got maybe a building project or something like that. So for specific tasks. But anyway, so that's the collective authority part. And then the next part, the next core principle, governance, not management. The school board has the function of governing the school district and providing, policy decisions, visions, goals, objectives, and so forth. A refrain that we like to use is, and not just we, but you'll find it in other places as well. It's not the board's job to run the schools, but to see that they are run well. So you make sure that administration runs your schools well, and we'll talk about some of the ways that you'll do that as we go on. The board sets the policies, visions, goals of the district, and then fulfills them through oversight of the administration. Superintendent, on the other hand, or the administration, on the other hand, implements the visions and goals of the board, manages the operations of the district, the SAU and its schools, and advises the board regarding legal obligations, practical considerations, policy, budget, etc. So there's a bit of a circular relationship there as well. In the second large pack that I provided you, so I think it's called roles and responsibilities for school boards, you'll see somewhere around page 10 or so, there's just a page from RSA 194C4, which are what are considered superintendent services. And if you look at that page, what you'll see is it covers everything within the functioning of an SAU in a school district. And those management functions are superintendent services. Those are what you're having a superintendent and an administration to provide. The other thing, there's a couple of other things in there. There's a side-by-side, again, I think it's following that one page. There's a side-by-side Department of Ed regulations that pertain to school boards. And then the other side is the superintendent. You'll see that there's a corresponding, there's a relationship between those two as you go down, whether we're talking about budget or staff or curriculum, so forth. But so the circular part that I was referring to is the board sets the policies, sets the budget, etc. The superintendent implements those things, but then has a two-part, circles back with advising you on your legal compliance, and you'll find that that's specifically called out in 194C4, and then also advising you as to which policies might be helpful, which policy revisions might be helpful, because in carrying out your policies, they find things that maybe the board didn't think of. They certainly find things that I didn't think of when I sit there and I write the policies. So moving governance, not management. Going to just look at a couple of examples of how those two dominions relate to each other. And I'm using as my example Department of Ed rules ED 30301. So if you see ED followed by some numbers, that means Department of Education regulation. And then on the other side, we've got ED 30202. So the first one are boards substantive duties, and the second one are substantive duties of superintendents. And just so looking at the board one, their responsibility relative to personnel, adopt policies necessary and desirable to control and effectuate the recruitment and employment of teachers and other employees. So what's your function? Adopt policy. What's the function of the superintendents relative to hiring and rules? Nominate all certified staff and appoint other employees. But here's the kicker. in accordance with state law, rules of the state board and school policies. So you create a framework, you create parameters, you create expectations, you might create procedures built into there as well. And the relative to hiring and recruiting, and the superintendent does that recruiting process in accordance with the policies that you've established. There's some other provisions underneath there that I don't think we need to get into, but you know, it's really the difference between you know, some of the arcane language that we have in our statutes. Nomination comes from the administration, election comes from the school board, a renewal is a component of a renomination and a re-election. There's different, you know, different rights that attach to people depending on their experience. One thing I can point out there is where you see, looking up at the 30202, the superintendent side, where it says appoint other employees in accordance with state law. So what they're saying there is for under the statutes, the nomination election process is required for professional staff. And there's some weird nuances in there that take too long to explain for tonight anyway. But for other staff, so your support staff, your custodians, your food service workers, your coaches, whatever, all those things, you could have a policy that says, superintendent, we're leaving it up to you. Just, that's our policy. Or you could have a policy that treats it exactly the same way that you do for your professional staff. That's where boards have, you know, this wide range of authority. You know, we've got some schools in the state, or not schools, but districts. We've got districts in the state that have 30 kids. They have 30 kids, and I guarantee you that the school board is far more involved in the selection of the custodian who comes in on Saturday to clean up that direct basketball than the Manchester School Board is. So, you know, there's huge difference. There's a huge range of options when you come to those types of things that are not mandated by statute. So I'll move on from there. This one's even more probably important. And this is often where a lot of friction happens between school boards and their administrations. So using the same school board rule, it's different language. I just pulled out language depending on the slide, because this one's supervision. So school boards adopt policies necessary and desirable to control and effectuate the employment, evaluation, and dismissal of teachers and other employees. So again, what's your function? It's to adopt policies. And then you look at the superintendent's language and look at how strong this language is. Direct and supervise the work of all employees of the district or districts within the SAU, and shall have all the powers necessary to make such direction effective. So the administration is still bound by the policies that are established by the school board, but that direction of employees is fully within the superintendent's authority. There's a couple of other, you know, notes below here. You have to have a performance evaluation policy, and then, you know, you've got the right to determine substantive standards of policies, but then collective bargaining kicks in when you're talking about the procedural components of evaluation. The red text at the bottom there is just calling out the pages where I have the resources that I mentioned to you a little while ago. So moving to just a brief outline of what management superintendent services really entails. You've got various statutes that require you to have superintendent or superintendent services. 18924, I believe, requires you to have a qualified person serve as a superintendent, whereas 194C requires you to provide superintendent services through somebody who's qualified. So it's a little different. And when you read 194C, the first couple of paragraphs, it's a little bit confusing the way it's worded. But the end result of that statute, you know, following the statutes around it, are that you need to have the superintendent provide the services. There are other certifications that might provide services that fall within certified services. So your business administrator, your student services director, those are subparts of what a superintendent is supposed to provide. So in small districts, you might not have either one of those positions. You might have a fiscal manager that doesn't really have the training to be a school BA, but the superintendent is responsible for making sure that all those things get done. 194C4 that and 30201, 30202. So the first and third of those we just sort of touched on a little bit ago, but 30201 is a sort of broader. 30201 is a broader expression of what the superintendent really is. Together, they assign all aspects of management of the district to the superintendent. And when I say district, it's districts within the SAU and the SAU as well. It's only so many words I can put on a slide. And so in more general terms, 30201 designates the superintendent as the executive officer for the district, provides all of the administrative and leadership services of the district. And but again, administrative and leadership services as defined and directed by the governing body. So again, that's what you're there to do, is you're there to establish the parameters within which the superintendent carries out the other legal responsibilities she or he might have. And the specific duties enumerated in statutes and rules. And this is the one of the expressions that I talked about before, where the superintendent is responsible for the district's compliance with laws, regulations, and rules as may from time to time occur. And that's part of where, the superintendent is having to, advise the board and help the board make sure that it's carrying out its legal functions. Governance responsibilities of the board. So I start that first title slide, that first word, governance. I put that there because in almost all of your actions as a school board or a joint board, you're acting as a governing body. Occasionally, a district board, it's very uncommon on the SAU level, but a district board will be called on to conduct hearings. And in those cases, your function is substantially different and you're acting in what's called a quasi-judicial capacity. So right now, we're just going to cover the highlights of what functions fall within your governance responsibilities. So first, what's the overriding purpose of school boards in public education? Well, in New Hampshire, 189(1)(a), it shall be the duty of the school board to provide a district expense elementary and secondary education to all pupils who reside in the district. Without that statute, you would have no reason to exist. I mean, that is the thing that you're here for, to carry out that purpose. Of course, when you're carrying out that purpose, you're doing it with multiple constituencies who have interest in how you do that. And you all know that nobody agrees, or many of the constituencies don't agree with each other as to how that is conducted. So that's part of your responsibility, is really trying to get a feel for the different constituencies and then find a solution that works best. But remember what the main purpose is to provide that education to the students of the district. Core responsibilities. When we do our full roles and responsibilities training, you'll see a lot more of the, here's the statute and the rule, here's the statute or the rule that, lays this out. I'm just going to jump through. I'm not going to cite all of the legal authority for them, but you will find them if you look through the longer packet. So first, and I put this one up first because remember, going back to that other comment I hadn't read, what is the function of the school board? To see that the schools are run well. Well, how do you do that? The most important thing, find a good superintendent, and then evaluate the superintendent. And you're evaluating the superintendent, not so that you can go, aha, you're not doing what we asked you to do. You're evaluating them because you want the board, you want the district's goals, the board's goals, and the superintendent's goals all to be moving in the same direction. And by doing those evaluations, whether we're talking about the that summative at the end of the year thing, or the pieces that make up that evaluation process, should start with the goal setting. You should have, multiple times throughout the year where you get together and you look at the goals and see how things are moving. Do we need to tinker with this goal over here and maybe forget that goal because things are going really well? I can tell you the year of the pandemic, goals went out the window, and you just started afresh. So but I use that as an example of, yeah, we had a good plan, but we need another one now. But don't wait till the end of the year to say, geez, how did the superintendent do his job last year? That's something that you want to monitor throughout the year. And of course, you do that every time you have a meeting. You have a meeting, superintendent providing you reports, superintendent provides information during the year. So whether you're doing it formally or informally, there's some level of evaluation always going on. But to make it truly meaningful, you want to try to connect it to those goals and those expectations, and then make corrections as time goes on throughout the year. Govern through policy making. First, I'll start off with this notion that policy doesn't just mean those things that NHSBA puts letters in front of, and then you go through a formal process of adopting and you put it in the manual. Policy decisions are almost every decision that you make, other than when you're doing hearings, when you're deciding the interest of a specific person and the specific person's interest. When you in the middle of the year decide that we did want to buy new goals for the soccer fields, but it's more important that we fix this thing over in the elementary school. So you decide as a policy decision to move money from here to there. You don't put that a code in that and put it in your book. You record the action in your minutes, and it becomes a policy decision with the board. So just when I talk about policy, I don't just mean those stagnant permanent documents in your policy manual. But what do policies do? They express the guidelines and the philosophical statements which chart the district's course of action. So this is the board expressing what it wants the district to be doing, what it wants the administration to be doing, how it wants it to be doing it. It creates the framework within which the superintendent manages the district, and staff discharge assigned duties. Also sets the parameters for the other constituencies in the group, because you have policies obviously relating to students, you have policies relating to members of the public, and you have some policy. Oh, I just said that. So you have different policies for different constituencies. You have different policies for different subject areas. You have instructional policies. You have facility policies. And those are the things that are kind of telling the administration that here's what we want you to be doing and how we want you to be doing it. They advise staff in the school community of legal requirements. So you'll see a lot of our policies, and I expect a lot of your policies, in some ways, just repeat what the statute already says. And then people say, well, why do you have to repeat it if the statute already says it? How many of you would know where you find the anti-discrimination statement for your food service? You have to find those in USDA guidelines that are tied to regulations that are tied to federal statutes, and that discrimination statement is different than the discrimination statement for all the other federal programs. So it's just that it's a way for you within your district, which laws and legal requirements do we have? Here's a place to find them. It's a good place to start. You might look at our, one of our sample policies and say, that doesn't sound right. Or I don't really like that idea. Let's go look at the statute, which is referenced in the policy, and you might decide you want to do it a little differently. And as long as it's compliant with the statute or the regulation, then you're fine. I did have, in the longer version, I tell you the difference between a legal, I mean, a required policy and recommended and so forth. The other part of policies, NHSBA creates sample policies. For the most part, they're one size fits all. Manchester uses them, the little district with 30 kids uses them. They are starting points. They are, they're the required policies and the recommended policies oftentimes do have very specific legal requirements. And so when your policy committees are working on your policies, there's some homework involved. But they really are intended as starting points so that you don't have to go through the work of, rebuilding or taking 5 different sources of law and putting it into a cohesive structure so that it makes sense for the people who have to implement it. We can spend a lot of time talking about policy. We're not going to. So next, core responsibility: establish a budget and provide budget oversight. Your budget is just a physical expression of policy. That when you make your budget, much of it is mandated, so you don't have a lot of policy making authority in there, but a lot of it is discretionary. Are you putting more money into your instructional line? Are you putting more money into your facilities line? Can you both get new goals for the soccer field and new tubas for the band in the same year? Maybe not. Do you need a German teacher? Or do you need a Spanish teacher? Do you want to teach Chinese? All of those things are policy decisions, and they all come out in your budget. So fiscal expression of policy, budget oversight. That happens through your manifest review. That happens through your approval of transfers of appropriations. It happens through your review of treasurer's reports. All of those things are the ways that you monitor the fiscal workings of the district. And when you see things that don't look right or you think need to be corrected, that's where your policy making comes in. That's where your authority. You know what? We did have a loose way of doing our manifest, but we're going to tighten that up and we're going to put a timeline in it. We're going to have certain requirements. And sometimes if you've had some, poor audit reviews, you'll have your auditor say, you need these protocols, you need these internal controls because things aren't working. You have way too many transfers of appropriation. Often means that you didn't really do the right homework when you put together your budget. So those are things that the board provides governing authority over by way of management and by way of oversight and budget setting. A couple of more key responsibilities. Assure strong channels of communication through comprehensive communication plans. Up until the last few years, especially in New Hampshire, it was uncommon for school boards or school districts to have comprehensive communication plans. I think we started to push in that direction about 10, 15 years ago, but the pandemic really did, call attention to the need to have a cohesive communication strategy. What resources are you putting into it? If one person walks away to somebody else, can somebody else pick it up and understand what's supposed to happen next? What happens in a crisis? Who's responsible for talking to which constituencies? What are the mechanisms for talking to those different constituencies? Because that the different populations that are involved in your school community receive information differently. Do you still send notes home in the student's bag, or do you just use family blast and so forth? So those various constituents, resources, community engagement. So community engagement, that's a big one, and that's I think you probably at least Sauhegan probably is in front of that more so than most other districts in the state. Next core responsibility: participate in the negotiation of collective bargaining agreements. I don't think we need to spend too much time on that. Develop long-range plans and attainable short-term objectives. Do the districts have strategic plans? Do you have, sort of some understanding of where you want to be in 10 years? How about 5 years? Okay, so when you do your goal setting, you know,
There isn't, hasn't been for a decade.
but I mean, it's a difficult process, but it's also a continually evolving process. So even if you did sit down and do one of those, 80-page comprehensive strategic plans, by the time you're done with it, you're needing to evolve again. But what it does is it helps you in your decision making at every single meeting. How does this decision help us get to this point or that point or the point after? And there is a legal responsibility under the Department of Ed rules to create long-range plans and attainable short-term objectives. It's another rule that's very oddly worded because when you read it one way, it seems like they're just talking about educational programming, but it goes beyond that because again, the school district and none of it exists without tying it to the educational program. I mean, if you don't have the education, then you don't need the buildings, you don't need the extracurricular activities and so forth. And then the last one, and this is where we all of a sudden walk away from the governing responsibilities. So acting in quasi judicial capacity. In those things, and I don't know if you've all had to deal with them, it's a very different function that you have. Because when you're dealing in your governance role, you're dealing with those things that cover broad selections of your community, whether it's, policy decisions for all students, things pertaining to the public's use of your buildings, et cetera. They're not specific to individuals, but when you work in quasi judicial capacity, you're acting as a judge, jury, you're responsible for providing due process to people whose personal interests are at stake in that matter. Student and families, the most common ones are probably discipline, manifest hardship. And then for staff, non-renewals, grievances, dismissals. It's just a little bit more about, why this distinction is important and how it impacts your relationship to the administration and how it impacts your relationship to problems that arise in the school. You as a school board member, I'm sure that by now, unless somebody was appointed today, by now, you have received a call or somebody approached you at the recycling center or in the fruit aisle at the grocery store to tell you about a problem that, they have with a staff member or another student in their kid's class or something like that. And you want to be helpful. I mean, you ran to be on the board so that you could help your school district in whatever way you think, that you could do that. But that's the place where you have to step back because that's not your job. You don't have authority to do anything in that when you're confronted with that situation. So what can you do? You can do two things. Number one, point them in the right direction. So know by name which policy it is that explains to them sort of a roadmap for dealing with that issue. For most of them, I don't know what your policy codes are. Ours are for that type of situation of where somebody's got an issue concerning an individual student or staff member. It's KEB, and know that policy and be able to explain how somebody can get that policy. Do you have an internet? Okay, so if you go on to this site, you click on the board page, you'll be brought to the policies and that you'll be able to find KEB. And that will tell you, what the steps are. It may be that sooner or later it comes back to the board, but they will have gone through those steps. And if it's a real important matter that, may end up involving attorneys, going through the correct process is the best thing that you can do for them. Because I can tell you, as an attorney who represented district for a long time, the very first thing that attorneys do are try to look for procedural ways to get rid of it. Oh, they didn't do this, so we'll send them back to go and make them start all over again. Or they, you know, they made such a mess of it that, you know, they basically sank their own case. But with starting where they're supposed to start and moving up through that chain, you're preserving the ability of the administration to properly manage the school, but you're also helping them hopefully resolve that issue with the least amount of controversy and procedure available. So that's the one thing. What's the second thing you can do? The second thing you can do is make sure that you know, this is a big enough district so that you may, I don't know what, you know, what the protocols are, but in many districts, it's make sure that the superintendent gets it. So if you receive that, you know, somebody reaches out to you in the grocery store, then you personally would send an email to the superintendent or to the, do you use an assistant superintendent for some districts, or is it split differently? Split different, and so it's, yeah, so you go to the superintendent, some districts like, you know, SAU 16, they've got assistant superintendents who are responsible for some of the smaller districts. So in your case, you want to send it to the person who's going to make sure that the people below, because he's supervising all of the employees of the district, making sure that they're at least aware of it. He doesn't need to be personally involved, other than to make sure, hey, by the way, board member, you know, heard from this, apparently it's something going on in the third grade, wanted you to be aware of it. And then, so you're putting it into play on both sides. The thing that you don't want to do when you get that call or you get that email or what have you, you don't investigate. All you need to know is enough information to pass it along to the superintendent. That's it. So you know what the, you know, what the school is, you know, maybe the person's name. That's enough information. You don't need to know, did anybody else see it? Have they had problems to, you know, before? Is there, you know, something else? That's investigation. And the reason why that's not part of your job, one of the two reasons. Number one, because we've already seen that you don't really have any function when it comes to one-on-one work. But more importantly, that if it is something that ultimately comes within the board's purview, you can't provide what we consider due process if you've been involved in the investigation. So we don't have judges who are also the investigators. We don't have jury members who are, you know, intimately involved with the details of cases. There are different standards that apply depending on the specific nature of the case, and the more important the interest, the more procedural protection or due process you'll see in a case. So for instance, you know, in the suspension of a student, you know, a short-term suspension of a student, there's very minimal due process. There's the right to hear what you're, you know, sort of what you're charged with. There's the right for you to, so you got notice. There's the right for you to hear sort of the evidence that's being used against you, and you have the right to respond. And that's about it. But if it's the non-renewal of a tenured teacher, we don't use the word tenured, but everybody knows what that is, so we'll use it. So non-renewal of a tenured teacher, that's someone who's had, you know, who's developed a property interest in the position that they have. And they have 2 pages of procedural protections, as does a student who is potentially going to be expelled. They have a tremendous amount of procedural protection. They, you know, they look much more like a court process than anything else they can do. But keeping yourself out of the investigative steps allows you to stay free, you know, free from bias and prejudice. It allows you to decide cases based on what you hear when you have the hearing, and it allows the person whose interests are at stake to hear that what's being used against them. If you're considering things that you heard outside of that hearing, that they're not able to respond to that evidence or that information. One thing I'll say is you're not expected to be, ignorant of the things that are happening in your district. Because that same rule applies to the district that only has 30 kids. And I guarantee you, they know everything that's going on. But there's the difference between just knowing what's in the public conversation and being involved in digging. And that's where, you really have to stay outside. Now, you might be familiar with the person who's sitting, at the table about to be expelled, because you've seen them 3 or 4 times, or you have kids in the same school, and so you're going to know things that perhaps would have you expelled from being on a jury. And that's okay. We've got a Supreme Court case in New Hampshire that says you don't have to be ignorant, and it's not the jury standard, juror standard, but again, the separation is important. Okay, so.
Hey, Will, as you kind of get into this next section, this is, as we have probably a longer budget presentation than we anticipated, so. It will
Okay.
just be like in the next 5-7 minutes, because.
Wind it up.
Yeah, wind it up.
Okay, so
That way, yeah.
I'm gonna.
We are actually, it's not, you're anything with you, you're trying to do 2 agendas.
Oh,
in
no,
one meeting, and so we're, and I really appreciate it, but I'm trying to get through this part right
Yep.
here.
No, I understand. Okay, so this one, I'm gonna cover this slide. This is important, and I think we can do public access to meetings. So first, think about what the right to know law is. The right to know law is the thing that tells you not that the public has access to things, because that's in the Constitution. What it does is it tells you which things that you might be able to decide that the public doesn't have access to. But one thing they're supposed to have access to are your meetings, and so it's important to understand what a meeting is under the right to know law. A meeting occurs. I think I used the word in here. The meeting occurs when you have 3 indicia: the quorum of your body, able to communicate contemporaneously, discussing things that are within the school board or a committee's jurisdiction. If those 3 things exist, then you have a meeting, and you're supposed to have followed all the rules for meeting: public notice, public place, all the quorum of the body present, and all those things. So if you communicate on Facebook comments, if you have a quorum of your board, communicate on a Facebook comment thread, that you can't have met any of the meeting requirements. But have you triggered the 3 indicia? Yes, you have. You're talking about school board business. You have, if you have a board of 5 members and 3 people comment on that thread, and they're able to communicate contemporaneously, that's a meeting. So that would be a technical violation of the right to know law. The contemporaneous communication piece is implicated by all forms of digital communication. The only form that I can think of that doesn't implicate it is snail mail. Smoke signals, yes. Voice, yes. Telephone, yes. Zoom meetings, yes. Facebook comments, yes. Emails, yes. All of those things, text messages, all of those things meet the able to communicate contemporaneously. Okay, so that's that piece. I'm going to jump through that, and then I can jump through. I often, with my efficient meetings or effective meetings, spend a lot of time talking about things you could do with your agenda, and I think you already do them, so I don't have to talk about those. So we'll move along and get to. Yeah, you have all these. Okay, here's a piece. So I don't know what your agenda policies look like. Most districts use our sample. Our sample allows school board members, as a matter of right, to have something put on an agenda using their agenda policy. So it might be, whether you have to do it a week in advance or what have you, you have the ability to do that. Doesn't mean that the rest of the board has to talk about it. If I want to have bagpipes in the schools, I want to put that on the agenda. somebody can, I get to make my pitch and then somebody else can move the table indefinitely. Oh, done. But that's the way that school board members should bring business to the school board. Not, I don't know if you have, board comment period. That's not one that we're huge fans of, but because board members often use that to just surprise the rest of the board. Nobody is prepared, nobody knew it was coming. It can create division between board members, it can create division between the board and administration. It often comes as, might come maybe as an attack sometimes. Maybe somebody's just tired and they heard it as an attack. You didn't mean it that way, but that's the way they heard it. And so it's not the most productive way to accomplish good decision making. And then just you've got to consider just some meeting etiquette. Punctual, come prepared, put away your phone, demonstrate respect for each other and the public. Just remember that, good decision making needs to take into account different opinions. So the whole idea of the process is to hear people who disagree with you and then try to find ways to solve problems that maybe weren't either one, neither person thought of it that way, but in having the conversation and listening objectively, you can decide, wait, that problem can be solved in a way that works for everybody. So let's do that instead. And then, yeah. There, I sit through there.
Yeah.
Do we have any questions?
It's been great, yeah. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Phillips? That was a lot of really great information. So I know I have some questions, but I'm gonna open it up to the board. Ms. Grant, if you have one, and
So thank you very much for this. One thing that I thought of as you were going through this last part is, there's multiple times when we might be discussing an issue, we take a vote and there's not a 100% consensus, but it still passes one way, one or two people can move it. When you talk about meeting going forward, and you work as a board together, you still have people who might disagree with that statement or disagree with that motion of the fact. What's your experience on?
Experience or my thoughts? My experience and my thoughts actually work together pretty well. So the board acts in a majority voice, and there are times when you're going to be in the minority, and what we would say is boards work most effectively and efficiently when the minority voice supports the majority decision. Now, the majority has to earn that respect, and that means, you'll have boards that have a strong majority and they just don't even give lip service to the minority. You need to hear from them. You need them to inform the majority decisions. You need to hear those opposing views. But moving forward, the district needs to know what parameters did you just set? Or are they going to shift, 3 weeks from now? There was one board a couple of years ago that played quorum games. So there was a policy that just wasn't going to get passed. Two members who would have voted against it were not there. So they passed the policy. Well, guess what? 2 meetings later, it was the other way around. They reversed the policy. First, they suspended the policy for how you reverse the policy, and then they reversed the and that's just no way to run a district. You should revisit decisions in a couple of different instances. And by revisit, I mean you're in the minority and you feel very strongly that that wasn't the right way to go. Get your buddies to run for election next time. That's one. Because when that happens and you've got a newly constituted board, people elected you for a reason. So maybe the community wants you to go that other direction. So that's one time. Another one is when you have new information. This policy seems like a fantastic idea. We passed the policy, administration implements it. It is a nightmare. It creates all sorts of problems that we didn't think of. And administration comes to you and says, great idea, guys, but, and so you revisit it, but you're not revisiting it based on the original argument, you're revisiting it because you have new information. There are times when decisions, they just hit you to the core so hard that, you can't support them. But does actively fighting with the rest of your board help you as a board member? Does it help the board function? So you can still keep your personal voice, you can express your voice, but don't bring it to the board. That you've made the decision, move on, and if you want to reverse that decision, the best way to do it is through elections. Or, keep looking for information, just don't stick it in the board meeting. Is that?
Yeah.
Okay, and I've been working with boards since 1993. That was one of my first school board days. And that the most effective boards move on and only revisit things in those certain situations.
Mr. Gambia, is something?
Yes, so in terms of communication, the social media aspect of this, because all of us here live in this town, so we're all, part of the towns that we represent, we're all active, some people may be active on Facebook as individuals. What is your experience or best practice to be able to communicate as a board via Facebook, whereas you're an individual communicating, representing what are your thoughts, what are the board thoughts, what's trying to strike that balance. You have some people like me, I couldn't care less about Facebook, I'm not on it, so anything that goes on is outside of my realm unless somebody tells me about it, but there are still people that are active on it and just commenting on posts as a citizen versus a board member.
So they're, on the one hand, board members don't lose their rights to free expression. However, they are restrained in several areas. One of them is, do you get to comment on the Facebook thread because you were the first one? What if there are 180 comments? Do you have to read all of them to make sure that you didn't have two other members comment before you? So the better way to do it, number one, don't comment on threads. If you need to express your own views, you can do that on your own page, turn off comments. Do not want comments on your Facebook page. You can invite people to contact you. That's okay. And then if they want to complain about somebody, then push them to KEB and to the person who needs to hear that complaint. One of the reasons you don't want your comments even on your own page is because if somebody starts to harass you and you try to turn that off, you violated their First Amendment rights, because you're conducting your official business, even though it's in your personal capacity, you're doing that in the public sphere. And enough courts over the last few years have decided that that the most famous one is President Trump and his Twitter account. He was communicating official business on his Twitter account, and he was turning on comments from people he didn't like. And the courts found that that was a violation of the First Amendment. And then there's another case down in Texas. Good news is that we'll actually get some clarification on this, because there is a case pending before the U.S. Supreme Court now on that very issue, where the courts found that the board member had violated someone's First Amendment, and they got appealed up to the Supreme Court. So maybe the answer there would change down the road, but right now the advice is keep yourself out of court at the very least. Maybe you didn't violate their rights, but if they claim you did, you'll spend the next few years fighting about it.
So how do you communicate effectively on Facebook then? Because you still have, is it a board page without comments posting? Is it a board, board account that can go on the town page and post and shut off comments? How do you communicate? Because so as much as we hate it, as much as you might like or dislike it, so what media is here, you have to be able to utilize it to communicate, because people are stuck.
We don't have our local town, paper in your hand anymore, so as a board, each of our individual boards as an SAU, I think we're all kind of grappling with how do we recharge.
So the best practice is that it's done through your district website. It's that you've got somebody who kind of knows what the parameters are, they've been trained in which things you can do and which things you can't do. And the message is coming from, so if you're talking about the board, remember that the board doesn't talk unless the whole board did it. And so, your initial questions, I thought, were about individual board members.
Well, it's more about the individual part of it, because you can post something individually, just saying what happened in a meeting, or you can post a comment on somebody criticizing the board, but you can post your comments as a board member and as a community member. But I guess my bigger concern is, how does the board effectively do it where they're controlling the message without violating First Amendment rights, without also, you know, violating quorum efforts too, or rules?
Well, so that's where the communication plan that I referenced comes into effect. Is it something that you have to look at? You have to look at the local resources, you have to look at, you know, do you have a robust district website? You know, that whole speaking as an individual part. When you're talking about the right to know law, you can't hide behind that. So you can't say, well, you know, it was just 3 of us talking about school board business, but we were doing it in our individual capacity. We weren't doing it as board members. That kind of like completely eradicates the whole meeting requirements. So if a quorum of board members can speak as individuals about business before the school board, that's a meeting. I mean, that is a meeting, so they can't do that. So commenting, the problem with commenting on public threads is that you can't regulate what others do. So if only one board member did it, there's no meeting violation there. However, if, you know, you wanted to correct what the person said, you know, the main comment, and you know, oh, that's not really what happened, so here's what happened. But then one of the people on the other side of the issue, well, no, that's not right either, it's this. And then the third person, you know, an hour later, didn't even, you know, scroll through all the comments and, you know, was either reinforcing one or the other. You now have a quorum talking about school board business. And the fact is, they're doing it in a way that they can communicate contemporaneously, even if they're not. And part of that, you know, we don't have the New Hampshire Supreme Court case that has found the violation in that context. But what we can say is the Supreme Court has been very clear over the last 10 years. If you can't find a specific exception in the statute, then it doesn't exist. And so, you know, we can only do what the statute, you know, we can only communicate what the statute lays out for us, and you know, what the Supreme Court decisions do.
You. All right, we have time for one last question, and then we're right on track to be in time with our agenda.
Thanks, I appreciate your presentation, and ask maybe the same question, but from a different perspective. Sure. And the communication piece is so important. So there's external communication. Probably it's thorny. It's thorny. Yes, it can be. There's also it can be beneficial though, communication plans. It's essential, but it can be thorny. The same thing is true for internal communication. So, you know, we meet once a month, right? You know, a lot happens between meetings, and so oftentimes it ends up being the case that, you know, you get the information maybe a week if you're lucky, sometimes the day before, sometimes after.
Sometimes today, right?
Right, exactly.
Sorry.
And so how does one navigate that confidently and without being fearful all the time of sharing information so that board members in their individual capacities can contemplate the issues of the day, the happenings of the day, can formulate follow-up questions, can start to prepare their feedback so that when you come to a meeting to discuss, make a decision, that everyone has the same information as early as possible and has had the same amount of time to contemplate it so that the discussions are meaningful and efficient, and that the decision makings can be the best that they can be under the circumstances.
But I don't think you'll ever have a situation where everybody gets the same information at the exact same time. And that's simply because the people who are preparing the information, obviously, preparing it, assembling it to present, have it before you do. I mean, and that's just the fact of how communication works. Or the person who's writing the sentence has been thinking about it for a couple of days before they wrote the sentence. So you're never going to get the information at the same time, but you're in the Sauhegan Cooperative Board. How many people do you have on your board?
7.
And this is doesn't really hit it directly. And then how many are in the Amherst Board? 5. And the Mount Vernon Board? 5, okay. So at least you don't have the situation that select boards have and some school boards that only have 3 board members have. Because they can't talk to anybody on their board about school board business. I mean, they just can't. And NHMA, the Municipal Association, will help with that. But the larger your board, you are able to speak to another board member. You can speak to 2 board members if you have 7. If you have 5, then you can't. And you can't engage in what are called sequential communications. And you can't engage in communications that are intended to circumvent the rules. So if you're going, if I do it this way, then I'm not violating it, but I'm still getting to communicate with the quorum. That would be circumventing, and you're doing it intentionally, so that is in itself a violation. So that doesn't hit your point directly. But what boards can't do, boards can't substantively communicate. The administration is not bound the same way. So the administration can communicate with you about things that you can't communicate to the rest of the board with. So one of the ways that, boards do it, I don't know if you have, intermittent superintendent reports, and the superintendent will hate me if they don't already. And I just created more work, but
We're in a unique situation in this SAU, but it's pretty complex meeting schedule with the 3 boards, so.
Oh.
Preparing multiple superintendent reports,
yeah.
like,
Well, whether it's SAU 29 has what, 8 boards, 7 boards? So. And 1 assistant, yeah, so, and so it's complex, and it gets more complex for some districts. But, identifying, so that goes to the monitoring aspect. Remember, you're monitoring the administration, the management of the district. Part of the way you do that is through the information you receive. So if you think that there are types of information that would be more helpful to receive, then that's within the board's prerogative. So an individual board member can't, call up the VA and say, hey, can you give me, 5 years of blankety blank and go compile this? You can't, but the board could do it. So the administration is responsive to its employer, and that is the school board.
those are great questions. Thank you so much, Mr. Phillips. I hate to close the Q&A session now, but I do need to, in the interest of time. We all have your contact information, so I would encourage everyone to email. I know I had some additional questions that I wasn't able to ask, and I will certainly be reaching out to you. And I would encourage you to email.
And just
thank you so much for being here.
Sure, my pleasure, and thank you for all being members, GRDs that help us or enable us to be able to come out and do this. And just if you are interested in hearing from me ever again, just remember that it's part of your dues. So there's no charge for us to come down here, and we'll come down as many times as you want us to.
That's great, thank you. And I'd like to take a 5-minute recess so we can reset some of the technology. If I can get some of that.
Oh, I'll make the motion.
Okay, great. So we're going to take a 5-minute recess and come right back in. Thank you. Okay, everybody, it is now 7:37, and I will call our meeting back. So following along on our agenda, the next item on our agenda is the superintendent's report. So I'll go ahead and turn the floor over to Superintendent Barry for his superintendent report.
All right, thank you, everyone. Again, appreciate you guys participating in the the conversation, the presentation from Mr. Phillips. I think there's some noteworthy information there, and I encourage you, if you have any questions, please do reach out. They are a resource that, any questions for me afterwards, please feel free to reach out as well. So in the packet this evening, you had a number of attachments. You have a superintendent's report, and then you also have an entry plan. The entry plan is also like linked into the superintendent's report, but we also attached it in the report's memo, so you could have it as a standalone. Those board members who were here in January got a draft version of this when I was interviewing for the position, so it might look a little bit familiar. But since then, that entry plan has been updated and amended as the work kind of began in really June 5th, and then officially in July 1 of transitioning in. So those are the two kind of pieces of information that I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about. But as you look through the board notes, and you look through the superintendent's report, if you have any questions like unrelated to the entry plan, I'll be more than happy to answer them. But this is the first time I had the opportunity to address you guys as a whole entity, and I really look forward to doing this periodically throughout the year when we have meetings. But as you can see, through the superintendent report, we talk a little bit about visioning. We have some goals in there that are thoughts, and so if anyone has questions, I'd be more than happy to answer.
Christine?
Perfect. Okay, can I just say, as intimidating as it's look, I love these lights, they turn on easier. First off, thank you for all of the details and the follow-up on this. It's really nice to see it go from plan to practice and some of the practice steps you've taken. I really want to applaud you for not just saying you're going to listen, but saying, here are the 100 people I talked to as part of my listening tour plus some. I feel like you absolutely have held true that if somebody reaches out, you reach back. And I think you've been extremely responsive and communicative, and I really appreciate that. And I think that our community appreciates that, feeling they have a voice and that they're able to hear what's on your mind and you're able to hear what they have on their minds. And so I feel like that was a really essential part of your plan, and I'm thrilled to see how far you've come with this. I wonder if you have any key takeaways you'd want to share about that, but then I also want to thank you for being part of our visioning time and really being able to be very actively having the room to hear what each of the different boards we're looking at for priorities and goals, and be able to bounce ideas off of you in real time. I think that was hugely beneficial. And I really I know it took a lot of time, and I want to thank you for taking that time with us, because I think it's going to pay off. But yeah, so a lot of thank you. And then the question is, do you have any key takeaways that are not already in support you'd like to share?
I appreciate the recognition of the work. And there's a lot of people that have helped with this. And most importantly, probably the three people that, to my right, Christine, Amy, and Steve, as people who've been working in this process, and myself asking a lot of like, hey, can I get some historical context? Or hey, can I get some, process questions? The chairs have been wonderful during, preparation for meetings, so I get to know the three, leading boards. And I'll say some takeaways. Extremely complicated. This SAU is extremely complicated. And really, some of the things that we talked about is we have three really distinct districts. You have MB, small, rural, right? School district, you have Sauhegan, 912, 7-person board. Kind of an innovative, progressive, cool story for the school. You have Amherst, a little more of a traditional New Hampshire, Southern New Hampshire school district. And so the operating and the process between the three are complicated, right? And I noticed that. I noticed people are really well intended, whether they come in from selectmen to, people in town, to people on budget committees, to moderators, that they're well intentioned people. A lot of passion, a lot of enthusiasm for whatever they might be interested in. And so when I start talking about the complicated piece, it's the moving parts and the different pockets of people we have in the different interest levels. Like, for example, we spent some time with, the Be Smart, kind of like the gun, family that I want to talk a little about gun walkage and safety, right? We talked a little bit about that, but then we, from that meeting, went to a strategic governance conversation with people, right? From that meeting, went to the chief of police from, Mount Vernon and Amherst, and that was one day. That was one day of learning and listening and seeing what people are interested in. So it's complicated, right? There's a lot of things. We're trying to narrow the energies and prioritize. And I'm really grateful for the boards that kind of came together, worked within the visioning process, allowed from that kind of some SAU priorities. And then in the school, level administrators were able to align some of their energies and all their energies into those priorities. So the complicated piece has been trying to find out how to operationalize what's happening right now in SAU 39 in the 3 districts. In a logical, realistic manner for the 23, 24, and 24, 25, while we plan, right? The other pieces, we talk about this often, and I'm not sure if this is a popular sentiment, but, I'm working very hard to facilitate conversations and opinions and ideas with people I don't think are really overly interested in compromising. They have their opinions, they have their ideas, they have their way of wanting to see things done. But as I've learned and I've listened and I've talked to all these varying viewpoints, I go back to the people to my right, I'm like, how are we gonna make this thing cohesive and simple and work when you have, 3 distinct districts, 1 SAU, and so I've been really grappling with that, and you see some of that in this. You see some of the visioning efforts, in the priority levels. You see some thoughts on goals that came out of these conversations, out of these listening sessions. I think, one of the things I want to put out there is, as we get through October, we're going to present the first round of the budgets, and then we're going to continue to have conversations in a very intentional, thoughtful manner. But then we're going to, in November, start to think about how we're going to communicate some of these, ideas and concepts that are outlined in the budget and in the direction to community people, community people that who do not have children in the school system, people who do have children in the school system. So that's the next phase of this. One of the things about the entry plan that I've noticed is, it's not completely siloed like phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. There are things happening within all 3 sections. And I think one of the things that I heard, when I was, onboarding is there is some urgency. There is some urgency to get a strategic plan. There is some difference of opinion what that should look like. There is some urgency on to improve communication to families, right, and community members. There's some urgency to put the data and the metrics of outlining the effectiveness of the SAU and the districts to the public, right? There's urgency to look at what we do around our instructional practices. There's an urgency, and so just trying to figure out where to do that makes standing with the boards, because you need a lot. Like there's a lot of meetings, a lot of work, right? To manage the staff, right? Like they work hard, to manage the schedule that we created and developed at the SAU over the years. It works. So I think those are my takeaways. I'm trying to narrow the energies, trying to bring people together, trying to get people in agreement about the direction of things, but do it with some urgency so we get some optimism and about where we're going and some cohesiveness about where we're going and clarity of where we're going. I think I see that as some takeaways.
Councilman Anderson, thoughts from Mike? Yes, Mr. White.
First, I don't envy your position at all.
You're looking to hear here, so I don't
That's-
see the air, but maybe something like. I know, it's weird, sorry.
All right.
There you go.
That's better. Oh, better. Oh, okay. Now I'm uncomfortable. So Mike, I appreciate everything you've done, and I know you just said that, not phase 1's not necessarily siloed, phase 2 is kind of gonna be melded.
phases. And I know in your plan it says winter of 2023. I guess this is just, I don't know if it's a comment or if this is more of just like my expressing my urgency in the plan. Me, JD in the packet talks about analysis of data and document review. I'm just wondering when you think we might, as board members, as individual board level, start digging into those documents and doing that review. Because I guess that's what I feel most urgent about. I know that you also feel urgently about them.
I think, in my opinion, different boards are in different places in those documents. So I think it's gonna be customized to the individual board. I can see some of this work happening, you know, when I say winter, right, you know, we're talking, it's October. And I can probably see around November and December, some of this work around like, kind of like updating and really outlining, you know, what we've learned and maybe some suggestions to bring to the board, you know, things that we found and ideas that we have and get some feedback in collaboration occurring at those meetings. So that's kind of what I see it.
Mr. Glover?
Talking about the superintendent's report versus the district plan particularly, right?
Yeah, you know, it's all kind of.
It's all kind of blended together, okay. Well, just on the superintendent report under the visioning work. It says that the more formal presentation of the visioning will be presented at this meeting. I presume that was because we were supposed to see this initially in August. And so I guess the question is, will there be a more formal presentation?
Yeah, in October meeting. Yeah, that's a slight typo.
Yeah, I assume so, but I wanted to make sure that this wasn't the more, whether the sentence was old or there was something still to be done.
That's continuing to be evolving, right? Like this is the first time that we've come together, you know, as a group and we're trying to get a lot in and for me, the visioning for the short, we had to do something, right? You know, 23, 24, we had to do something. And what we did is through the work done in the summer at the various retreats, we were able to kind of find some trends and commonalities of what people really wanted to put their energies to throughout the 3 districts. And you see the visioning work is those through lines. And we'll continue to flesh that out and so people are more clear about the action around those steps. That's when you'll see the next step, what's happening in our school, in our districts around that.
Okay, great. I'm looking forward to it. I assume that is the case, but I want to make sure.
Ms. Brent?
So first, I just want to say thank you for all of the energies you and your team have been doing with that. Incredible list and take how you're taking on and what you provide so far. The quality work we will appreciate. Just a one question I have is we have the artificial intelligence this is very often. I know you continue to work on. Is that something that each school is looking at more individually because it applies maybe differently each grade level, or are you taking that?
No, we did some work over the summer with building level administrators, and then they have taken it and you know, put it into practice with their staffs. And then obviously it does look different at 9, 12, you know, 7, 8, 5, 6, you know, so it's individual. And that's rapidly evolving. You know, like, so we put some guidance out to our building level administrators with the help of Steve and Christine around that work. And it's more guidance on the things that they should be thinking about as they put things into their handbooks and to work with their staff.
Mr. Bird? Mr. Are you?
Yep, follow up on that. So is it clearly communicated on families, students as well?
I think through the newsletters and that's how they've been communicating. It's AI. And it's in it. I know it made it in the books. And then some of the stuff that they're grappling with at the building level that they're communicated out via newsletters.
Mr. Bird?
So on that one, so on my 9 to 5 job, we're actually under explicit orders to figure out how to use AI to improve services and things that are delivered. So I just want to caution you, I'm not worried about the kindergartners and the pre-K. But as the 9 through 12s move into that world of work after that, there are employers that are going to be heavily leveraging the world of AI. So whatever policies this group comes up with and however we try to work with that, it's got to be a blend of understanding the difference between using it to write my term paper and using it for what else it can do. So however we tread on that, just keep in mind that in the other world of work, it's being leveraged heavily. And in my case, throughout the entire federal government. So just keep that in mind.
Anyone else? Anything for Mr. Berry on the superintendent? See?
All right, so to go twice. I just wanted to ask for the security and safety night on October 17th. If we can make sure that gets recorded and posted, I think that it's really important information and not everyone will be able to make it in person. Including some of us who will not be in the country on that night. And so it would be, I think that I am excited about what's being discussed. I know I've been at some of the ones in the past and they're really, really useful. So I think that on some of these meetings, we always record, but that's a hit or miss. If we could make a point of recording this.
Are you, Terry, speaking specifically to the youth risk behavior portion or the entire night? Because I'm not sure if that room's gonna
As
be set up.
much of the night as
Record
possible.
every, you know, like there may be some.
Yeah, I mean, if there's an actual presentation, I think it would make sense,
Okay.
and then any kind of handouts and other resources, making it kind of in a one spot, make it easy to get to those who weren't able to physically be there.
I'm just gonna jump in and answer this real quick. I will say that, I will hope that they will do their best to record, having posted a number of facilities information nights at AMS, which is where this is taking place. Getting a clear recording could be tricky, but, I think it's fair to make the attempt.
Yeah, we'll do our best, depending on, how we set up and how the presentation works.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Do that.
Great, and Mr. O'Keefe, did you have a question? Okay, all right. Anyone else? Great, well, thank you, Mr. Berry. So, unless there's any objection, what I'd like to do next is move, the next item on our agenda is the, FY23 board goal review. I'd like to move that down and move our appointment of our SAU budget committee members up, along with our SAU budget presentation. Does anyone object to doing that? Okay. Great. So we'll start with the appointing the members to the SAU budget committee. We had 5 applicants. Mr. Howard Brown from Mount Vernon, Ms. Sharon Core, Christine Grayson, and Dan McClurk, all from Amherst. So thank you all for your willingness to serve, and I see a couple of you sitting in the audience tonight, so thank you for being here for this meeting. I apologize that it's taken us a little bit to get to this point in the agenda. So with that, I will open it up to the board for any comments or questions on it. Ms. Grant?
Sure, I'd like to just clarify, we spoke at our Sophia Finance Committee meeting last night, and Christine Grayson is on that committee, and she's actually going to be the Stephen representative to the SAU board. So with her permission that we spoke to, we're going to remove her from this list tonight.
Okay, great. So what we're looking at then is, and thank you, Ms. Grayson, for serving on significant budget finance in that role. So we're looking at Mr. Howard Brown from Mount Vernon, Ms. Sharon Core, and Mr. Dan McClurk from Amherst. Mr. Leclerc, since you're here this evening, I'm gonna put you on the spot for just a moment, and this will be really easy. So in your email, you said you'd be willing to serve on either for Souhegan or for Amherst. So would you be willing to serve for Amherst?
Yes, I would. Thank you.
And do you have any questions or anything? You're welcome to come to the podium. And if not, that's also perfectly fine, but you are here and I would like to open that up to you.
Oh, I appreciate that. First of all, if you don't mind.
Would you mind to step forward to the microphone? You will. And you want to press the button until the green light comes on. Let it move on there. There you go. Thank you.
All right, yeah, thank you, I appreciate it. Just for those that don't know me, I am one of the state reps in Amherst, Dan Leclerc.
At my phone call. Thank you.
Don't be apologetic, that's how it's spelled, and us French people, it's like Velux, we'd like to be a little bit more, so, but but just thank you, I don't really have any questions, I'm here to learn, like I said in my resume, I guess, a little quick sentence, so I'd like to get more involved with the town, get to know more people, as I've only been here a couple years myself, so I appreciate that, thank you.
Well, thank you again for being here. We appreciate your engagement. So with that, I would love to take a motion. I don't know if those of you who are more seasoned than myself, can we do this all in one, or do we need to do it individually?
Yeah, sure. How many people will we select for this committee?
Yeah, so we can select one for each gender. We only have the three.
And Christine is our. She's a vegan finance.
So Howard Brown will be Mark Bergen. Dan Leclerc will be
Amherst.
and
Sharon
Sharon
Ford
Ford
would
will
do
be so one for each.
So that's done.
correct.
That fills all the spots. So I move that we accept the 3 people who are just enough that we need for all the spots.
Thank you for that. Do I have a second? Second from Mr. Vayu. Any discussion? Okay. We'll go around with a roll call vote, starting with Mr. Jones.
George, yes.
Beam, yes, and thank you.
Daniels, yes.
Snowden, yes. Dave, yes.
Brian, yes. Evans, yes. Kingsley, yes.
Gascoigne, yes.
Goff here, yes.
Burge abstained.
Glover, yes.
What, yes.
Mr. Eckhoff or Ms. Boulay Zimmerman, are you still with us?
Yep, I'm here, Diana. Goulet Zimmerman, yes. Okay, now I can't hear anything.
Yeah, no, we got you, Anna. Thank you. Mr. Eckhoff, can we hear you?
Okay,
Are you there?
yeah,
We can hear
Eckhoff,
you.
yes.
So-
Eckhoff, yes. Oh, we got it. Eckhoff, yes. Okay, great. Motion carries. Thank you so much for your willingness to serve. At this time, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Business Administrator Stacy. For the first draft,
Start, but I just want to say to the budget committee members, we'll get something out to you from our IT department, so you get set up with an SAU 39 email, and then we'll get you invited to all of them.
All right, we're gonna jump into it. We're getting pretty well into the evening, and I want to keep it in mind that this is draft 1. It's draft 1 of the SAU budget, and a lot of effort has gone into this, primarily by Amy Facey and her staff and people at the SAU, especially Katie Hannon. So we do appreciate the work, and this budget is going to kind of highlight some of the things that I spoke about in the superintendent report around visioning. Talk a little bit about the goals, where we put some of the energies, and so I hope people know that this was a really intentional, really well thought out, budget. As we went through the entry plan process, and as we were onboarding, and as we were doing the vision work, it became clear that we needed to kind of think about how we work, and we say that quite a bit in the meetings throughout the district and the SAU, like how we work, the work's gonna get done, how can we be more efficient, where can we put our energies? And I think what you see here is a responsible draft 1 budget for the SAU that is, fiscally responsible, and I hope people can appreciate the work that went into it, and we'll continue to work through this through the budget season. But as you know, the mission, if we're going to engage, challenge, and support, and we're going to focus, budget. I learned a long time ago that your budget is always a reflection of what you value. I also learned that you gotta take it super serious when you are the steward of taxpayer dollars. And that is really important as we kind of, keep these things in mind, but really we wanted to improve the educational experience for kids and for families that live in Amherst and Mount Vernon, right? That's what we want. So what you'll see here is you're gonna see a focus within the SAU budget, and you'll see a focus within the different district budgets in these areas, right? You're gonna see, an increase in the investment in data and in the time and energy into it. You're gonna see a value on communication and the work that we put into that. A reminder that, we worked with Amy, Christine, and Steve, that, something that I'm learning, and it's, Steve can probably speak more to this, and he's gonna jump in a little bit at times, because some of these things are carryovers from 22, 23 to 23 and 24. But, the public education is extremely regulated, and there's not a lot of wiggle room with some things, and I remember as a building principal, like, my budget was absolutely huge, and I didn't really have control. Like, you have very limited, kind of like flexibility of things in, and so as we talk about, contract and PPC policies, and we talk about federal law and state law, that all kind of plays a role into this. And so you'll see a little bit of work around that. You can see the priorities reflected, and these are, you've seen these throughout the summer, into August, into September. We're gonna focus on reading and literacy. This, idea, we're gonna try to capture and expand instructional time with what we have. We're gonna, people know, for me, like, it's instructional strategies, it's teachers knowing their students. It's people in buildings between administration and staff willing, to collaborate in a genuine manner to get better at your craft, and that's done through the supervision and evaluation system, and that's it. Like, I think sometimes I forget sometimes, like, when you're the building principal, you can really, or a superintendent, you can really influence things on where you put your energy. And I hope people realize that, for us, this is our shot at it. This is our attempt at it, right? Best practice around these areas. We talk about we want to build trust in that entry plan. It is, and I started to count up the conversations in the meetings. I had Chelsea, because I document all my meetings, and it was well over 150 meetings, with people. And the only way you do that is you take the meetings, you have conversations, and then you're honest, right? Like, we're gonna be honest about our data, and we're gonna, you're gonna see right now, one of the things that's being put out there is we're gonna put it on the website, and by in the next few weeks, you're gonna see that, right? And that's important, and that hasn't been done, and that's how you build trust. And the goal is we want to pass budgets. Like, let's keep in mind, like, the budgets haven't been passing consistently. Haven't. So you have to think about why. And for me, as I thought about some of the work that we've been doing, is like, we're trying to make decisions that are as responsible and purposeful and logical and move the needle, all while trying to create a budget that the community of Amherst and Mount Vernon are going to support. And so, the decisions where you're making there, I can tell you, as we roll through some of this, they weren't easy decisions. They have impact on people that, I work with and work, with and supporting in the SAU, and it's not easy, right? And it's not easy to, when you're making decisions and finalize. And I own this. I'm the superintendent. I own this budget. These came through here. I worked with Amy Facey to get there, and we made some pretty heavy decisions. And so, as we get into it, I want people to realize some of the things that I haven't talked about with people here. One of the things that we have here in our schools is we have a second-year principal at Clark Wilkins, a second-year principal at Amherst. We have a very veteran, very fortunate principal in Mount Vernon. We have a first-year principal at South Eaton. They are, in my opinion, really, really important people to the success of our students' experiences in this SAU. So mentoring those people, plus the other administrators who are, not as experienced, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to make sure people, are being supported. We're responding to them. And so that's where we put a lot of our energies at the SAU. We're gonna have some facility projects, as we talked, we're well known about what's going on in Amherst with the roof and the building project. Burns starting to do a facility study. Souhegan, we had a commissioned visit, by NEAS. And I've never really heard of that. Like, NEAS can just commission a visit when they have a concern, and they had a concern about the science labs. So that could be something that we have to respond to. So there's real work. Right? And then I'm gonna let Amy talk a little bit about health insurance stuff. Right? That's gonna come up later. Right? So it's real. And so we really want to be putting our energy in the most responsible manner possible, in the most logical manner possible. And then, obviously we have strategic planning and some operational planning that, needs to get done. And one of the things I say is like, we're here. How we got here, that's really not that's not where I'm at. We're here and we're gonna do our best, given the circumstances we're in, and we're gonna create a responsible budget. So I think that's what we've done. So some things that also took into consideration, and I'm gonna have Steve kind of join in on the conversation, because there was SAU Budget Committee last year. They made some recommendations. They put that out to Steve and Amy and Christine about some things that they wanted to be considered, and we kind of responded to some of these. But I'll let Steve kind of like jump in and talk a little bit about a couple of these here.
Last year, I had the honor and privilege of just stewarding some of this through. You'll see later on how Mike considered and will make a proposal regarding the two suits. We have begun a salary comparison market study to provide consistency and understanding. We've worked with Municipal Resource Incorporated, a vendor that does that work. Again, last year we had a subcommittee that addressed the SAU budget on the warrant, and the committee met thoughtfully and issued a recommendation to not do that, but certainly that's also come up in some of Mike's meetings. One of the issues, one of the concerns that came, if you remember back to 2 years ago, we did some salary adjustments. When I was actually, I don't know what my title was, but it was around, it was June, I was before July, so I was kind of in this funky world. But what we've looked at this year is really taking a look at SAU salaries in really 4 categories. So if there's a standard COLA of 3% or 3% raise, that is pretty standard in connection to others. So if an employee worked diligently and met all the expectations of 3% COLA would be warranted. If there was concerns about employee not meeting expectations, that COLA may not be warranted. And then the other piece is, if we do need to keep a position after the study to attract and retain, that's a wage adjustment. That could be an increase to the base if repeated, like instead of a 3%, that could be a 6% into my market adjustment. And the other piece, and what we begin the process with Mike and Amy, is a pool, a merit pool to award exemplary service. There has been some very unique tasks. One of the things, I don't know if you remember last year in one of my reports, I talked about the significant work navigating the Hampshire retirement system. I don't know if you remember that, but it was an awful lot of work. There was some extraordinarily diligent, high quality work that got us through the Hampshire retirement audit. There were some employees that could be, for example, during this year, that could be recognized in a merit pool. But because that only happened in 1 year, that's only a 1 year as opposed to the base. So this year we're structuring a 3% base. We're waiting for wage adjustments based on the pool, but there is a $5,000 pool for meritorious above expectation service. We think that was a quality response to the concern raised by the SAU Budget Committee. The thoughtful decision on unencumbered funds, that's through our process, but that's how we kind of addressed, and Mike will get to the lead bullet in a few minutes. But please know, we took last year's concerns raised by that version of the SAU Budget Committee seriously and thoughtfully and tried to adjust based on their feedback. Sorry, I think it's a little long. I apologize.
It's all right. Good.
Is that like a bonus instead of a?
Correct.
Okay,
So it doesn't multiply every year.
great, thanks.
And before we open it up for questions, I just want to remind or let everyone know, we do have a non-public on the agenda. If you have any specific questions that are related to personnel, we'll have an opportunity for those. Mr. Stewart?
I got a few more slides, and the name's gonna jump in, and we'll take some questions at the end.
I jumped the gun there. You'll be first on that list. Thank you.
So what you see here is the org chart, and you guys, get this shared out after, after this meeting. This is the current organizational chart, and, you see how we're currently made up. And, it's been a little bit transient. I've looked at different versions over even since I've been here in 2020. But that's the current org chart. And so what I want to not spend so much time rehashing this, but as we get into this, some of the staffing changes that we're going to be presenting, we're going to working towards eliminating the assistant director of student service. We're going to eliminate the 0.5 administrative assistant, consolidate that to existing positions. We're changing the title of the second assistant superintendent to director of curriculum and accountability. We're going to increase the data specialist from 0.7 to 1.0. And in an effort to kind of improve our communications and finish developing and implement a communications plan, we're going to add a very part-time communications coordinator to help us out with that. And so these things will result in the org chart looking like this. And what we feel is that we feel that we can continue to do our work under this organizational chart. We can continue to carry out the priorities. We can continue to, support our building level administrators. We can provide an educational experience that is good for students and families. It's fiscally responsible. It answers some of the questions and concerns that people have had. It was not easily gotten. A lot of conversations with people in a short period of time. So I want people to understand, like, I became the superintendent officially on July 1. And so we're here less than 90 days later, and we're rolling out a pretty substantial change to the budget. And the only way that, or the organization chart and therefore the budget, and the only way that is kind of done is through a lot of professionalism and a lot of hard conversations. It's a lot of compromise within the building. It's a lot of reflection on where we are. It's our desire to, support the work of the boards that they, develop a budget. And so this is our first draft. And, people say, hey, are you able to do this? And if I wasn't presenting this, by presenting this rather, I'm telling you that we can manage all the things that we are doing right now and the things that we want to do. And it wasn't, developed like that. And so with that said, there's a series of slides as we share this. It kind of talks a little bit about what different people will be doing. I don't want to spend a ton of time on that tonight. You'll have this as we get further into it. We can talk more, but I do want to kind of turn it over to Amy with the executive summary and the budget drivers. Amy, at slide 22, I believe.
Sorry, just a point of order. Will this presentation be put on the Trello board?
Yes.
It's not there currently.
No, we didn't want this there before this meeting.
Okay.
So, but it will be.
Okay.
Yeah, the presentation and the specific budget workbook will be typically posted on the website so that they're available, and I'll also share them out with all board members at viewers. All right, so. Okay, so, yeah, this is just an executive summary, that also includes the budget drivers. So the FY 25 budget is a 1.4% increase from 43,289 over the FY 24 adopted budget. We divide the budget into two main categories: personnel, that includes salaries and benefits, and non-personnel, that includes facilities, technology, and operations, which is primarily services like legal, audit, supplies, phone, etc. So for personnel, the major driver of this budget is a significant projected increase in health insurance and dental insurance at staggering 21.9%. and 4.7% respectively. This added over $100,000 to the SAU budget. For perspective, the current year increase from last year to this year was 4.1% for health and 1.5% for dental. The GMR will be officially set in October, but we have been given our likely rates from Health Trust. Another major driver in the opposite direction is the proposed position changes at the SU that Mike discussed, and the end result is a significant increase in salary of approximately $95,000. The proposed 3% salary and benefit pool as a COLA is the same percentage as last year, and the added merit pool for $5,000 plus related benefits that Steve discussed. And again, this merit pool do not add to the employee's base salary, but will be for additional workload and exceptional performance. New Hampshire retirement is set for 2 years, and as this is year 2, the rate remains status quo from last year at 19.64% for teachers and 13.53% for non-teachers. For non-personnel, there are modest increases in facilities, primarily our service contracts for preventive maintenance and some needed painting at the brick school. For technology, there are some increases in software pricing, some device and equipment replacements, and a main core switch at the SAU that's split between the SAU and the Hanford School District. For operations, Stephen and Mike mentioned the market salary study. We have a required actuarial study every 2 years, some legal costs that we're being careful to budget for, and some furniture replacement needs. So as a majority of the SAU budget is salaries and benefits, and there's a proposed wage increase of 3%, a review of the current economic conditions that are relevant to the employment and cost of living indices is provided for information purposes only. I started this last year. So the employment cost index, ECI, measures the change in the cost of labor. Compensation costs increased 4.2% in the Boston, Worcester, Providence combined statistical area for the 12-month period ending June 2023. And the consumer price index is a measure of the average change over time and the prices paid by consumers for goods and services. And the CPI with a 2.3% annual increase as of October 23rd. So this just gives some information when we're looking at a 3% cost of living increase. That just provides some additional data points for consideration. So this chart breaks out the FY25 proposed SAU budget by the major categories of salaries, benefits, facilities, technology, and operations. And as discussed, the increase in benefits is primarily due to the increase in health and dental, and is responsible for increasing the budget by 3%. This is fully offset by the reduction in salaries, so there's a reduction of 3%. And the other budget changes include smaller increases of 0.3, 0.7, 0.4, attributed to facilities, technology, and operations, respectively. This slide breaks out the budget by those major categories and provides a visual. And as expected, the majority of the costs at the SAU are for salaries and benefits, 53 or 59% salaries, 31% benefits, facilities, 2%, technology, 4%, and operations, 4%. This is similar to last year with a modest decrease in salaries. FY24, it was 63%. And as expected, an increase in benefits. FY24 was at 28%. So this slide is TBD. So we need several data points to determine the amount of the SAU budget portioned out to the 3 school districts. The ADMA, which is the average daily membership and attendance, is based on October enrollment numbers, which is right around the corner. And then that's calculated. We submit numbers and it's calculated by the state and receive that back. The equalized valuation of school districts for local taxes is available, but I'm just going to wait until I have all data points to do the calculation. And the revenue used to offset the individual apportionments with the district, will also be populated, for the next draft. So we expect the ADMA to be available for draft 2 in October, but certainly before the public hearing in November. And we'll have the other data points completed as well. And the last slide is the budget review process and next steps. So, yeah, hold on, sorry, I'm looking at my, yeah. So, yeah, so tonight we have, draft 1 that is being presented to the board. Tomorrow we'll have the budget posted, we'll have this, presentation posted, and the questions submission form will be opened up. And after this, I'm just gonna briefly go over the workbook and, show some of the newer board members what the question submission form is located. On the 10th, we will have our first SAU budget committee meeting, and I'm pleased to have those memberships filling up quickly. On October 26th, we'll have draft 2 other presentation. On November 7th, there will be another SAU budget committee meeting, followed by a third meeting a few weeks later. And then finally, the SAU public hearing will be on November 30th. And following that, we will have the apportionments that will be adjusted in your individual school district budgets once it is voted on in the public hearing. So we could just move to the budget file. Yeah. That's it. Yep. So the familiar budget file to veteran board members. This first page is a table of contents. It just tells you what all the different tabs are. You can click on questions at this point. Yeah. Yep, there it is. Well,
Well,
Yeah.
sorry,
There you
I
go.
apologize.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
Thank you over there. Good meeting, Alex.
So this is a way for folks to ask questions. For any questions in the budget, and the budget committee will use it, board members use it, you can even have, the public use it. So, it's just a pretty simple form to fill out, and with the account number that's helpful, or at least the budget area, and ask your question. And then see if you want to go back. Yep, and then click on the tab below. Yeah, that's fine, either one. So click on questions and answers, so you can see there's a text in there. So what will happen is the question will populate here, and we'll receive it. And the business office will assign it out to a relevant staff person, and we'll put an answer in, and it will show whether your question is answered or not. So we work really hard to answer these questions very quickly. Usually a 24 to 48 hour turnaround time. If it's something that's going to take longer, we'll let folks know that, we have to do some additional work. Great, do you want to click on the draft form?
Budget.
Yeah, so this is the budget. It has all of the categories, the account number, description, the FY23 actuals, the FY24 adopted budget. The working budget is where we do some, if there are transfers that the board has approved, then those will be reflected in the working budget. And then the FY25 draft 1. And then a column that shows the difference between draft 1 and the prior year at a percentage calculation, and then some notes that are populated. And then the other tabs on the bottom, salaries and benefits, those are just the different subcategories of the budget. Click on SAU personnel. So this is all of the salaries and benefits in one area that gives a little bit more detail for each of the different positions in the SAU. Categories chart is that was the chart that you saw in the presentation. Budget assumptions. Those are the assumptions that I spoke about in the presentation. Account code elements, that's how the different accounts are, the numbers are made up. Position control codes, we have a specific assigned position control code for each employee. And then finally, the budget committee, that is populating, will add the new members to this tonight. I think that is it. Any questions?
Thank you, Ms. Bailey. So, Mr. Director, please first on our written list, thank you. Followed by Mr.
Well, like 4 questions now, so, I'll start with the most important one. And at what point do we start asking questions, about specific choices made?
Well, you can start by submitting one through the question answer form, and then we'll start to get responses to you. That way we don't have to wait for meetings.
So I'll just put some of my questions in there and I'll let somebody else ask them.
Thank you, Mr. Director. Mr. Torres.
So thank you for that, Amy. I have, I guess, one question and a comment. As far as the comment goes, I can validate some of the percentages you threw out. Because, as a matter of fact, it's funny you brought out the, some of the increases, because I just got the salary surveys back today. And, just sticking to New England, I see a low of 3.8 and a high of 4.2. So, you know, the range that you're bringing is consistent with what we're seeing. As far as the healthcare, that also we're seeing significant increases there. I guess my one question is, do we have an ability to go out to bid? We don't, that we do it as in a group or in a pool, correct? Yeah, so we have no, and who is that provided? Is that through the state?
It's health trust.
Health
So
trust?
we're not alone in this.
Yeah, no, we're seeing it as well.
State.
Yeah, this year is the first year we saw a double-digit increase.
Yeah,
That's the initial quote. I mean, we use CGI as a broker. But yeah, we're seeing it. It's really, most of it's on the prescription side. We really have no, it's not even medical, it's just unfortunately we're getting older as a country. And prescription is driving a lot of this premium, so, you know, that's just a fact, but I guess my question was directed towards either you or Mike. One thing I did notice in the structure is, did your direct reports in the proposed, new structure, is that increasing, or are you keeping the same level of direct reports in the new or the proposed structure?
So I've added a direct reporter and part-time communications person.
Okay.
There's an additional direct report to the superintendent. Okay. That's the only one that's changed. And the data person is increased. Yeah, they're reporting over the.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm sure there's reasoning for that. Just my only concern is, as you could probably surmise, as the level of direct reports increases, the ability to address a lot of, or be where you need to focus, you know, becomes a little bit more challenging and difficult. So that's the only thing I caution when I see something like this, because it's like, are we spreading ourselves a little too thin?
Yeah, no, I can understand that, and I think the models change, you know, I think, you know, with the experience and the skill set I have coming into the superintendent, you know, compared to, you know, previous superintendents, the needs for different positions, you know, have evolved based on, you know, who we have now, right? The other thing is, some of the things that we have to address, you know, around communication, whether it's social media, whether it's website, whether it's, you know, quarterly newsletters, whether it's, you know, updates in a timely fashion internally, right? Like that's where that kind of helps. The data person, I work around, metrics, and using the data in really internally for building administrators to work with their staff. That's where that kind of grew out of that. These are conversations that occurred through like the entry plan. So, the org chart, as we get into it, could be, it's a draft still, right? And we're kind of getting ready for this evening, but as we have further conversations, that could be slightly amended, depending, as we go, but that's kind of how we manage all that.
Yeah, and I'm not questioning your ability to get the job done, Mike. I just get a little concerned when it's
No,
a little
I
bit
appreciate
flattening. Obviously.
I feel like people in my life, want that. People look it up, right? So, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Mr. Bird?
So I had two quick questions. I'm new here, but I'm not new to this process, so, I guess my question was, in all the other budgets I've been involved with, the board has provided direction to the superintendent. And then the superintendent and the administration went from there. Were those meetings earlier this year, or is it done differently because it's a SAU versus single districts? I'm just normally in every other budget process I've been involved with over the last 4 years, it's been the board saying, here is our vision for where the district needs to land on this. Here's our overall guidance, please, for the budget, versus what I'm seeing tonight, which is, here's our proposed budget. So I don't know if the more veteran members of this body can tell me whether that occurred or whether that didn't. If that's not how it's done here, I would strongly recommend we move in the other direction. And then the second question is, I'm thrilled to see the communication position. I would wonder if a contract might not serve us better, or worse, or if you considered whether that could be an outside vendor. That's the way we did that in Conval versus bringing on someone in board, because then that ends up and carries forward and so on and so forth. So those are sort of my two initial reactions. I thank you for the work. I understand what goes into all of it. I don't pretend that it's not public, but just purely operational.
And I'm gonna let this run, to take that first question. Since she's here,
Yes, I've been involved with the SAU budget process for a few years, but we've had a little changeover in the superintendent the past few years. So I think, we've been trying to, we don't really have an exact process yet because I think it just changes. But what's typically happens, the superintendent usually brings us forward his budget, and then we have those discussions. And one thing I think that changed this year that really helped is Mike was talking about his vision with us during the summer. And he kept saying, I'm basing my budget off of these things we're discussing now. So give me your feedback. And he was asking for that feedback when we had those meetings. So he developed his budget that he's presenting tonight to us based on the information that he presented. So that's how it works.
Mr. Bowman?
Yeah, the spreadsheet looks really great. I mean, I gotta give you kudos for that. It's pretty awesome. The superintendent's report had this sentence. I wonder if you could provide some context as the process is. You wrote, the concept of a zero-based budget has been discussed and prioritized for all areas of operations. So how does that zero-based budget principle work its way into the spreadsheet, into the worksheet?
I can say, when we reviewed, where we currently are at, right? What we were doing. And then we said, what were we doing and what do we want to do and where do we want to go? And so we essentially went as an internal, to say you went through the department and the budget and say, hey, how are we going to build this? And where are we going to put our emphasis? And so what you saw is us looking at what we do and where we want to go. And when there was a difference, we were able to reallocate or move or prioritize the vendors. That's kind of how we do it.
I can add to that also, John. So this summer we had a retreat with building leadership and SAU leadership and administration, and I presented the concept of zero-based budgeting and how it is really supposed to work. Where you in your mindset you start from scratch, you start from zero. we do provide historical information because you don't want to forget something. So you could easily forget an account if you are just starting from scratch. So we actually, for your school district budgets, I'm looking forward to presenting those because we encourage principals to go to the lowest level of folks who are providing in service or purchasing supply. So we said, hey, go through your inventory cost and take a look at what you have and what you actually need. Look at, all of the services that are provided, and it's a change in mindset. Think that you have nothing and that you're building from there. So I actually spent quite a bit of time at the retreat going over that concept with the folks. So we are, I'm sure it's not perfect, but it's pretty easy to just rely on past historical data and say, hey, we used this much last year or over a multi-year period. And there are some areas where you actually do need to do that. And we'll have those outlined in notes in the school district budgets. Sometimes you just have to do an average number. But yes, the concept of zero-based budgeting was heavily brought forward to the folks who were putting in the input on these budgets.
That's great. I really appreciate that. And that notion came up a few years ago, and it just really was lost in the universe. So that's great. It's going to affect everyone, all the districts. So just a follow-up example so I can understand. So if, for example, you had a position that was retired and at a high end of the pay scale, and your expectation was to bring in someone not at the end of their career, but early or mid or something.
Yeah.
Would that translate into like a default budget? Like the number wouldn't be what it was last year because that person's gone. It might not be an entry level number because you don't want to undersell it. It's still got a higher quality person. You can pick some, I don't know, median number or something based on some like comps or something like that. Is that what you've done now? Implementing zero-based budgeting replaces retirees, for example?
So in the proposed budget, yes. And I actually work with superintendents to determine what salary level makes the most sense depending on the position, because some positions are harder to hire than others. So we do want to account for that. We are not including that, at least at this point, in the default budget. For the main reason is that there are items that are not allowed to be included in the default budget. For example, transportation, the increase in transportation costs, we are not allowed to include that because that cost has not been standardized or put out on a warrant article for the legislative body to approve. There are other items such as, which will be very important this year, non-union health and dental benefits are not allowed to be in the budget, but we have to pay for those. So if the statute changes for the calculation of the default, where you're actually able to include items that you need to pay for, then certainly it would make sense to have a 1-for-1 with the salary in the proposed and default.
Well, listen, your explanation is an example of transparency. So I appreciate that. That's Superintendent Barry's honesty, claims for honesty. So I think as long as people know that is what we're doing, then you have a good chance to garner support. So thanks for that answer.
Can I add something to that? Oh, I'm sorry.
So I had 2 more questions on this.
Yeah.
Go ahead, this is.
Yeah, just real quick, just to add on to what Amy kind of eloquently explained, zero base really doesn't apply when it comes to salary and benefit related items, because you really have, that's why they go through the process of looking at market surveys, because, if the market says Y, but you only willing to pay X, you're gonna have a hard time trying to bring someone in. So it really applies to more of the operating side, what are we spending on this? What are we spending? So you have to look kind of outside of salaries and benefits when you start looking at zero-based principles. Because
I appreciate that, unless you're reducing staff. That would be a 0 days.
that's the only way, which is, she put together 91% of the budget is salary and benefits. So unless you're really looking to put a dent in the budget, you have to start looking at that.
Thanks for
Thank you.
Yeah, so a quick question. I know we're getting late. Some of us older people like myself are getting sleepy. But maybe a procedure question. So, the superintendent. Definitely appreciate all the thought you've put into reorganizing personnel, $95,000 or $96,000 decrease in salary. Seems like some big moves. Where would it be appropriate to ask questions about that in the sheet? Or is there gonna be some later conversation about those?
We will have the non-public this evening that would be the appropriate to ask.
Okay.
Health specific related questions. Does that answer?
Yeah, sure. I just wanna, because I feel like people might wanna know the rationale, not saying that it's wrong, and saying it might be helpful.
All right, one is in answer to a previous question. Two things, we set goals at an SAU level and individual board level, and so normally they take our stated goals and use that as one of their main criteria for setting the SAU budget. And so if we don't update those in a timely fashion, that's not on them, that's on us, right? But that is something that they use. And I was really happy to see the slide that talked very specifically about feedback from last year's SAU budget review. And so there were some things that they said it's too late to make some of these changes now, but we're keeping them in mind when we do next year's budget. And so I was really happy to see us circle back to those. And I know that a lot of the work was put in last year by that budget review committee. So thank you for addressing those very specifically. And my question then is a follow-up to, will we see these as of July 1st and none of this earlier, or might there be the opportunity to do some of this sooner, like the communication space?
This is for July 1.
Okay,
However, I have asked Amy about communications and, where we're at with the budget in different places, and there's a possibility of trying to be able to do something. Because for me, there is some urgency on that.
and that's why I asked.
So we're just kind of seeing where we're at and seeing how things are playing out before we come up with a recommendation. So.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Matthew?
Just a quick question on the part-time positions, the 0.35 for communications and the 0.6 and 0.7 are on there. Do they qualify for benefits? We offer benefits for that. But I assume, what's the threshold to qualify?
30 hours.
1.75.
Roughly. 30 hours a week.
Questions around first draft of budget. All right, moving on. So as Mr. White stated, this might be a little off the guard again, so I apologize for that. The last item was really a review of the FY23 board goals, so it wasn't digging into any new goals. It was really taking a pause to look at the goals that this board established last summer and reflect on those. What we will plan to do for our October meeting is ask, because I know that each of the individual districts have done a lot of work on visioning, continue to talk about planning. So I spoke with Ms. Peters, and what we would like to do is ask the chairs for each of the individual districts to be prepared at our October meeting to speak to your individual district goals and planning, where you are with that, so that we as a group can discuss how we can coalesce those individual district goals and plans that are in the works into something that would speak to our broader vision of our SAU, which is to engage with learners. I believe Ms. Peters did send out, Ms. Peters sent out an email to each of you asking if you wanted to submit some feedback on those goals from last year. Our initial plan was to kind of roll those up into one concise document Didn't get a lot of feedback in that realm, so given the hour of the night, if anybody has any overarching opinions on the goals from last year that they want to share right now, we could do that. We'll give it 5 minutes, and then I'd like to move to the public comment and go into non-public, because I think we have some questions there. So, does anyone have anything that they would like to share when we reflect on our FY 23 goals, which were included in the packet? And I know it's late, and I look forward to a party and robust discussion next month. I just felt, we felt like it was important that we at least remind everyone where we started with our goals last year before we get into any lengthy discussion over where we're going. Okay, not seeing a lot of tape. Oh, Mr. Glover.
No, that was it.
Okay, all right, so not seeing any takers, I will go ahead and open up the floor for the next public comment two. Is there anyone in the room who would like to? All right, do we have anyone attending on Zoom?
We do, but no hands up.
No hands up, so if you are joining us virtually and you would like to address the board, please raise your virtual hand. And we will promote you to a panelist. Going once. Going twice. All right, I will close public comment to 2. And at this point in time, I will take a motion to go into under RSA 91A3.
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
For chair updates, they're gonna be tabled as well.
Thank you, Mr. Glover. I totally, no, we'll do the board chair updates. My apologies. So I appreciate everyone's grace tonight as I run this meeting for the first time. So thank you for that, and thank you for helping me out there, Mr. Glover. We'll start with Mr. Gothier of the Amherst School Board.
Okay, so we had quite a bit of business that we took care of last week. First of all, we officially nominated and he accepted Mr. DeBurge to my right here for the open position that Victoria Parisi resigned or opened when she resigned in June. We had done this in non-public, inadvertently trying to allow candidates to have some privacy and ask some questions about filling in what it's like to serve in a school board in this day and age. We had a right to know request saying that was likely wrong. We consulted with legal. We confirmed that it was wrong to do that. So we interviewed the final 2 candidates that were still willing to stand for it last Thursday. And the board was unanimous in selecting Mr. DeBurge, who comes with us, as he's mentioned tonight, from Conval with some pretty vast experience there. And then overall, in general, with policy in his private life, his career, I should say, with the federal government. So we're thankful for other folks that did consider themselves or put in their names for the application. And then the ones that lasted through the entire process, we are good with that. And this position will now be open up for a full 3-year term in March of next year. We started to set we opened the applications for the Resource Reconsideration Committee. Ideally, we won't have to worry about this, but we are looking for 2 community members, 2 adult community members, and then we'll continue to look at the policy to see what other list of members in that policy might be applicable to Amherst Resource Reconsideration, particularly around student participation. So we want to thank them for discussing a couple of weeks ago at their meeting the use of the annex for some sort of a preschool program across the district. They at the time decided that they were not going to go in that direction, and they also eliminated the idea of moving 7th and 8th grade over there. So Souhegan will stay for Souhegan, and we will not have any Amherst participation there. So we're glad that we can move on, and I look forward to the next steps with that. We will have some more in October and November from our facilities plans as we get to those months. As we get to those meetings, I should say. I want to recognize Kelly Blaze, a 7th grade science teacher. She is joining scientists on a National Geographic expedition. They'll study plankton in the Pacific Ocean. She was one of 5 teachers selected across the country out of 5,000 applicants that applied for this. And there is a statement that we released, our board notes for this month. You can find a link in there. It's a Google site that you can use to follow her progress and follow their studies and what they're doing across the ocean. Food service donation, an anonymous donation to replenish school lunch balances and replenish the donation funds. We had building grounds discussions. The first phase of our roofing project is complete at AMS, and we'll be meeting with EEI in October and November to discuss next phases. Terry already mentioned the October PTA meeting, their safety meeting. They did have a meeting for their annual kickoff last month and registered over 40 new volunteers, which are desperately needed in the schools. And obviously you saw the budget presentation tonight, kicking off budget season. We will get our presentation at our next meeting, October 19th.
Mr. Eckhoff, are you still with us? And do you have an update from Mount Vernon?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, thank you. The floor is yours.
My report will not be as detailed as Mr. Gauthier's, but we had a very efficient, nice start to our season with our first meeting up on the hill. We had a good report from our principal, Mr. Licklider. We're just off to a really strong start up there. We're very pleased with our new hires. And the building is in great shape. I guess the biggest project we're undergoing right now is our building study project. We had a meeting before our board meeting, kind of an organizational meeting, which was very effective. And we are still looking for one community member to join us to participate in this project. The townspeople, as you'll remember, voted for a bond to pay for that. And the monies don't have to be all spent in this year, but we are looking for, and we're going to send out an RFP from the SAU office for a firm to help us with this analysis and study of the possibilities of what our options are moving forward in Mount Vernon. And that is pretty much an update from the Hill.
Great, thank you. Ms. Grant, something?
Sure, make it as brief as possible. We had a meeting September 7th, that was our regular board meeting. We went through and discussed the principal's report and her new organization chart. Dana is the first year principal, so we give her a lot of credit. She has a huge list as well, and she is hitting the ground running, and it's just fantastic to hear from her. So we're excited working with her. One thing, just to report out everyone, we are looking at getting repeaters here at the high school. First, they have to make sure that there's enough signal strength, but we can help with the cell phone coverage here, if possible, we'll be able to once that has been confirmed. We looked at, we actually we authorized the naming of the baseball development center in the back to the RJ Reagan Player Development Center home with the Sabres. So we're very excited and very, very thankful for that donation and opportunity for our students here. We did have on the book reconsideration committee, but after discussion with the administration reminded me, and a few people reminded me, when we appointed the people back this spring, they are on for a 2-year term. So we are not going to reappoint anybody right now until the policy is updated. It says we need to do it at the beginning of the school year. So right now, since that policy is not in place, we're keeping the people that were appointed for the 2-year period. We discussed graduation requirements at length. There is nothing that's decided. There's a lot in works, and it will be another, I'm sure, lengthy discussion in the upcoming meetings. It's everyone's looking at things have not been looked at for many, many years. So we're making sure we look at the entire curriculum and the entire process before a decision is made. And we think Tim Control, who's done a lot of work along with Dana and their help there. So we appreciate that. And then September 11th, we had a meeting regarding facilities, as was mentioned, and it was a 2.5-hour meeting. It was a lot of good discussion. There was the presentation of potentially looking at preschool, putting in the location, and also discussion around putting 7th and 8th grade in as well. There were various concerns, various strengths that were put forward, and we decided that there are things we're not addressing for students at some meeting now that we need to look at and maybe present opportunities for those students before we take the space for outside students. So we decided to hold off and let's work with Dana on looking for other opportunities, as well as looking at our science lab requirements. So we'll be coming forward with that.
Great, thank you. A lot of good work in each of the districts. Does anyone have any quick hitters for any of our board chairs or something? Mr. Lover.
Yeah, is it going to normally be our local practice to include the principal's reports from all 3 districts, or well, from the relevant schools in the SAU packet. We did that last year. I thought it was very helpful.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm happy to discuss that with, Chair and Woman Peters.
That would be my
Yeah,
request.
yeah, that's great.
Thank you.
And just a point of clarification, we can then make a decision about seventh and eighth grade. I mean, Stephanie summarized it very well, but Tom had said that eliminated that. No, the motion that was carried was that Sahuagin wasn't going to discuss that as an option anymore unless another board came knocking on Sahuagin's door and said, hey, what about this? So if another board is interested in sparking that conversation, then Sahuagin has indicated that they would listen.
So is it the same policy for the preschool? If Mont Vernon comes and asks about a preschool, you'll open up that conversation again, or is it the seventh and eighth grade? So we continue to ride this hobby horse as long as we can.
I'd have to go back and read the motion, but I think Mr. O'Keefe made the motion and you may recall that I think it was specific for seventh and eighth. That motion.
Thank you. Okay.
Would you like to respond?
Yes,
I didn't read it,
but I think to be fair enough, the part of the motion at the time preschool was to say no, seventh and eighth grade was unless something, someone came forward and speak to us. However, I would have to qualify that if someone had to come to the Sahuagin board and present new information, I'm sure we would take it up. At this point, that's what we're saying.
I'm sorry, when you say somebody, duly elected school board representative, or Joe Smith, who lives over on Badger Lane, decides he wants to bring this up again at the recommendation of somebody, or maybe not the recommendation of somebody, and we have to go through this yet again, when Amherst School Board has consistently said its piece on this so far,
I'm going to say that it needs to come from one of the school districts to approach.
from an actual district, so not just Joe Smith, who lives over on Badger Lane, that wants to bring this up, and then we open up Pandora's box.
That was the motion.
Thank you.
Points of clarification or burning questions? Okay, last one, Mr. Thibert, and then we are going to.
Sorry, for Tom, there was a question from someone about who to email about the Amherst, reconsideration.
Oh.
Is that you?
That's, no, that's. Okay, I believe that was-
To Chelsea?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so I will now accept a motion to, move.
Move to go into non-public session.
Thank you, Mr. O'Keefe.
Oh, sorry.
And I have a second. Let's take a roll call vote.
Gorgeous.
Yes.
No, yes.
Hey.
Brian, yes. Lawrence, yes. Anthony, yes.
Gascoigne?
Yes. There, yes. The bird, yes.
Glover, yes.
Well, yes.
Glaze
Eckhoff,
Zimmerman,
yes.
yes. That was Eckhoff and me, both yes.
Thank you.
We just